It was muted. Oh.
So then, while Vanessa's speaking, we'll flip. Just do a quick test.
Check, check, check. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone just come to the middle to make it cozy? Come on. That space in the middle, would you be able to just come closer and take the space? You have to move now. Good morning. How's everyone doing? TGIF. It's a great idea to have a conference and summit on Friday. Everyone's super relaxed. Am I right? Chill. And that's happy hours on Friday later, so you can go on to Saturday and Sunday as well. So we have a lot of speakers, great speakers here from San Francisco, Seattle. We have people from all over the place, Indonesia, Thailand. Where's everybody else from? Germany? Hong Kong? Manila? India and Korea as well? Great. And the past 2 years, the summit has been held in Seattle, and it's the first time in Singapore. So, Sandra and Barry is doing a good job spreading the DevRel love in Asia, internationally. And this event would not be possible without our sponsors. Twilio, our event partner and key sponsor. Please give them a round of applause. GitHub and Carousel for bringing the students in. Google and GetLinks for the happy hour sponsorship. Stripe and Sticker Mule for being community sponsors. Plot Devices for being exclusive Storyboard notebook sponsors. And Microsoft for student scholarship sponsors. Round of applause, please. And now let's hear from our keynote speaker, Nicole Zhu from Gojek. Nicole brings an open heart to open source, and she fraud fights like a superhero. And let's hear it from Nicole.
Thanks. Hello, can you guys hear me? Good morning. Thank you so much for the warm intro, and thank you for the invite. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you guys for showing up so early in the morning. I hope this is an exciting talk for you guys. There we go.
We're doing manual switching today because our technical limitations.
Great. So this is DevRel, Developer Relations. And again, hello, I am Nicole. My talk is, I hope, going to be quite efficient. It is broken up into 2 parts. In the first part, we're going to visit how developer relations has evolved in the past few decades. And then in the second part, I will posit 4 behavioral changes and 4 pattern changes for how we think DevRel is going to evolve in the near future. Sound good? Okay, fantastic. Great. So I hope I'm somewhat qualified to talk about this. I've been on both sides of the table. I was a developer for 3 years with companies like Pivotal Labs and IDEO. And currently, as the opening intro person mentioned, I'm currently the vice president of fraud and risk at Gojek. So how many of you guys have heard about Gojek? You guys know what we do? Oh, hey, that's great. So I think this audience response is very different even 1 year ago. No one really knew what we were, but in the past year, we've grown exponentially. We're a ride-sharing company, and the way I like to talk about it is we deliver over 100 million people on the backs of over 1 million of our driver partners. And now we're, I think, opening up in Singapore at the end of November, so look out for us. We'll be giving out a lot of customer promos and discounts. And we also not just deliver people, but we also deliver food, packages, and money now with GoPay on the backs of these millions of drivers and customers. Great. So at Gojek, for us, the goal of developer relations is talent recruitment and talent retention. So, and to just do goodwill for the community. So while I was there with one of my colleagues, I ran this program called AI Saturdays, Artificial Intelligence Saturdays. It was a very intense 10-week sequential program where every Saturday from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m., people showed up, we had speakers, and we had these MOOCs, massive online classes, and we just played those very technically intense MOOCs. And week after week, people kept turning up. And so we thought, wow, this is very interesting. Maybe there's something here. So week after week, we kept hosting it. This photo was taken, I think, in week 4. So people gather together and watch MOOCs, and by the end of the 10 weeks, we actually graduated a couple of people, folks who've never done data science or AI before. I think I counted about 6 of them, or 6 of them approached us, because we always want to measure success metrics, right? 6 of them approached me and mentioned that they were able to get interviews as junior data scientists because of this program. So even though those 6 people didn't come to Gojek, they went to other technical companies in the community, it was still a very great and invigorating thing. Great. And sitting on the other side of the table, I also contribute to open source. I'm currently a part of a open source, non-paid smart contract auditing team, and I contribute code to the overall blockchain ecosystem. So I'm somewhat familiar with the various ecosystems, strategies, techniques, and events like this that companies have set up to foster developer relations and developer engagement. Great, so on to the interesting part, the content. So here, I posit here are the 3 major shifts in the past 2 to 3 decades that I think those of us in the developer community have seen when it comes to developer relations. Great, so 90s to early 2000s, 2002, I dubbed this the technical writer era. So towards the tail end, I think, was the dot-com bust, so 2001. And APIs, if you guys recall, were invented in the year 2000, and Google started around the end of this cycle as well. So this is the technical writers, the manuscript manual era. This was when a lot of engineering textbooks dominated the space, right? If you wanted to get into it, you buy a Java textbook, or you buy a VBA textbook. Does anybody know how to code in VBA? Remember reading through those tomes and trying to get onboarded? So needless to say, developer onboarding and developer communications at that time was very complicated. And the hypothesis here is, software engineering as a field was still relatively new. And when you look at traditional industrial engineering, mechanical, chemical, that's really how things are done, right? Your content was made for people who had to troubleshoot something. And so not the best user experience and not the best engagement or quality went into something like that. So in the way that these companies accomplished this type of developer relations, and this isn't true across the board, but this was a theme that I think people back then complained about a lot, the way that companies got these folks to do developer relations is they would take the bad engineers who they didn't want touching their production code base, and get them to do developer relations, which we subsequently learned, which we'll get into later, is not the most ideal situation. Right? So you've got people who didn't know or didn't have a passion for the field, often, to write the very first things that new people to the field would have to read, and to leave that first impression. So many years prior to this, there's a pretty influential pioneer in the field of developer relations. I think his works came around in the early 70s, subsequently 80s, and he was a technical writer. So he writes from that perspective. His name is Robert Pirsig. Do any of you know who he is? Or what books he's written? Okay, so he wrote this book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Yes? Any of you guys read once, twice, 3 times? 3 times, wow. So it's a very influential piece, and it's actually become a cult classic in the developer community, although he never once talks about software engineering. But he is a technical writer. And so it's thematically consistent. So in the book, he essentially posits that there needs to be quality in things like technical manuals and in things like documentation. And the same treatment, quality, art, lyricism that goes into poetry or a song or classical work should be applied to engineering as well. And so this is really the earliest strong philosophy on what we later dubbed as developer relations, right? So this achieves the goal, he posited, of drawing people in. And once you do that, in the end, you inspire more creativity and innovation on a platform that would be otherwise very difficult to learn and somewhat intellectually unattainable. Yeah, so cult classic. I really recommend it. It's withstood throughout the years. So, in the subsequent era, I think in many ways, Robert's proposition came true, right? So you saw the emergence of consumer tech companies like Google, Airbnb, Gojek. We started doing developer relations for the goal of hiring and building a good developer reputation and talent retention. And then you've got your SaaS, enterprise SaaS middleware companies that came around, like Salesforce, AWS, the Stripes of the world, that needed external companies to come in and build on top of their platform and have these success stories and subsequently evangelize their products and how third-party successes were enabled on top of their product platforms. So because of these two very different but very important goals that were ubiquitous across companies that really rose up in the previous decade, there was a race to gain developer trust, right, and to gain developer market share. So in a very good way, I think this has led to and fostered more high-quality content and high-quality development. That big Q word, quality, started to exist in the content and the engagement, as well as the talent that started funneling into developer relations. Yes? So this ecosystem, in turn, led to a very interesting Cambrian explosion of collaborations, integrations across many of these different powerhouses, and slowly across open source as well. Great. So companies now have teams that are fully dedicated to developer relations, as you guys know. So very quickly, this image I sourced from Google's dedicated DevRel team. Namely, they have a very strong philosophy that I think underpins what a lot of companies get at in the past 10 years, which is folks who do developer relations. Often they're legit engineers. They're excellent communicators. They tend to be quite diverse, empathetic, and in a way, each and every single one of them are social media influencers to a very, very specific and targeted demographic. So I think while DevRel wasn't, the only driving force behind the successes and massive adoption, PR behind most of these companies, I think it's had a very big play in that whole ecosystem. So from 2016 to now, and perhaps the future, here's a pattern that we're observing. Feel free to contest me on this. So I posit that in the past couple of years, we have already seen patterns that going forward will make developer relations the business itself. We're in an era where I think traditional engineering paradigms like Web 2, social networks, all of that is getting flipped on its head, and it's changing again with these new viable technologies that have already gone through proof of concept. So I think both in terms of technology and the human behavior that's underpinning it, with more and more nomadic mercenary generations that you're seeing, folks that prefer more distributed teams, right, coming into the developer ecosystem, I think as a whole, our world is becoming more decentralized. So I'm dubbing this the protocol era because protocols are essentially a series of rules that people agree on, or a mission that people agree on, that underpin communities or systems that can be decentralized or distributed. So the protocol era. So we're not just talking about blockchain here. I think there are other protocols like P2P, solid, socially linked data that Tim Berners-Lee just announced, very different technology, and other decentralized distributed systems, concepts that are now available worldwide, right, thanks to internet penetration and faster processing power. These are all very viable technologies. So I think most of these protocols have, what makes it powerful is that a lot of them already have embedded economic models that engineers, mathematicians, a lot of physicists can directly apply and experiment with at scale and get day one value without the need for going to institutional legal entities and compromising certain things there, which is both powerful and very scary. So this means that in the future, I think one pattern that we can see is communities of people will gather strongly around a single goal, rather than immediately belonging to a legal entity, a legal company, or a product that just exists in their locale. So these communities will control things, from product decisions to the underlying economics structures or the incentive structures to what's going to be built on these platforms. Long story short, TLDR, potentially more power to engineers. And that's only interesting if there's guarantee that there's going to be consistent and at-scale participation from more and more and more engineers. Okay, so based on that, with that as our assumption, here are 4 quick predictions for what developer relations might look like in the next 4 years, not just in the world of decentralized and distributed systems, but across all technology companies. Great. So I think your strongest and most charismatic engineers will do developer relations, if not full-time. This is because your protocols require it. So you see for a figure like Vitalik Buterin in Ethereum, how public he is. That's very different from the founders of Web 2.0, from Internet 2.0. I think he realizes that he needs to be super involved in explaining, well, albeit in one sense, a much more difficult technology, but to also give that sense of ethos and sense of trust and reputation to the ecosystem in order for more and more engineers to come on board. I think you already see personas like this in traditional SaaS, but I think protocols do take it to the next level because developer relations is the business, right? And the more you do this, and the earlier you get into an ecosystem and start contributing to it, you have these new economic incentives that reward you if this platform, if this protocol takes form later on, right? The more people come on, the more you gain in return. And so you do benefit from onboarding more engineers. And I think in order for an idea to be viable at scale, you need people of good reputation to stick their name in the game. And I used to have all these t-shirts in my engineering undergrad that said, "Trust me, I'm an engineer." Conversely, it's engineers don't trust non-engineers. So I think you have a much better time of kind of getting to these conversations and earning that trust as a baseline without any extra work when you put really good and charismatic engineers in front of your product or your protocol. Great. So the second posit is that companies will fund schools, both physical and digital, thus taking developer relations to the next level. I think in the early 2000s, we were very much in the business of selling shovels. Though to integrate with another system, it was very straightforward. Most companies would define an API, right? Or you simply read developer documentation and everything is clear cut. So you are essentially selling shovels for people to dig gold. I think now we're in the business of selling excavators. There's a harder barrier to entry to just get into engineering. So professions that are commoditized aside, right? And in many ways, things like JavaScript development, some of that stuff through the very great phenomenon of all of these coding schools that have happened that have equalized that opportunity, you now have other aspects of engineering, value engineering, that's much harder for everyone to access because they require knowledge across many different disciplines at the same time. Namely, if you want to do anything with blockchain now, you have to learn systems, security, math, as well as the domain expertise and some economic insights. So excavators require a lot of training. You simply cannot hand someone a workbook or invite them to a one-day conference and expect the same type of stickiness or the same type of retention to happen from that type of education. So I think that a lot of companies are going to pour a lot more resources and become much more involved in the curriculum and also strategically to sell people onboarding materials so you get lock-in grandfather effects as well, right? You're already starting to see a little bit of that with GCP. They launched a bunch of things on Udacity, Udemy for DevOps, but if you look at it, it's not conceptual, it's very practical. It's essentially their post-university funnel for getting people to use GCP. It's very wise from their perspective because you get better unit cost economics. It's so scalable. When you have a MOOC doing this and when you give people certificates and you give people, I think, all of the stickiness of going through that type of training course, it becomes a lot more sticky, just psychologically. And I think a lot of Chinese companies, in a physical sense, have taken it to the next level as well, in that they've just set up HQs or technical offices directly next to universities, and they're getting intensely involved with the curriculum design at the university student level. And there's a joke where you graduate from university and you just walk 10 meters next door and you go into the HQ. That's essentially curated your entire college education. So in many ways and more, I think academia, or rather setting up online schools, remote schools, in-person schools to teach much harder content will be another pattern that we're going to start to see surface. Great. I think the third posit is developer relations will become more personable and customizable. I think this one is not very contentious. Specifically, I think that content will be very video-driven with massive consolidation around your popular engineers, your engineering superstars, your engineering rock stars. And I call this the Steven Gritter effect. Do you guys know who Steven Gritter is? Have you guys ever taken any of his classes? So he doesn't code anymore. So he's this very famous developer on Udemy who gives online classes, and he spends a couple weeks learning a new language, a couple weeks learning a new framework, and he launches classes. And he has a very massive following in the developer community and is really the go-to for a lot of technologies. So if Steven Gritter explains your product, your adoption rates jump. And he's not doing the sales. I think that's the big paradigm shift from previously when you expect even your engineers, like Palantir, right, in developer relations to do sales. folks like Stephen Gritters, the future online superstars, influencers, they're just going to talk about the nature and the quality and the exciting nature of the technology, and they're going to teach it. And the magical thing is he hasn't done a single point of sales, but the adoption rates, and I think the metrics that you can see as a return is arguably much higher. Great. And last but not least, I think a lot more companies, not all, a lot more companies will be, or at least try to be, open source first. So Red Hat was just acquired for, what, 34 billion, 43 billion, something in that range. They've really provided a very clear path to revenue, and they've provided a very interesting playbook for how you can monetize and make open source viable, right? And in many ways, for the first years that they started out, those were all free software movement guys who never did a single day of sales, but based on their reputation and based on the natural developer relations of the high quality documentation, specs, free evangelism that they did, there was many iterations and many amazing people working on their tech stack. And so it becomes interesting to think about if you're enterprise SaaS and building something very complicated like enterprise software, right? So on the other hand, again, I think the protocols and tokens of the future will have, I think they've given us a business model to fund the development and to allow the early implementers to adopt disproportionately from subsequent use of protocols. Again, going back to incentives. Rather than the disproportionate sums going to early investors, you have your early adopters and early contributors getting more and more massive sums of the eventual payout. So right now, to be really concrete, and to give you guys an example, there are over 10,000 active developers contributing to blockchain. They're all highly technical and skilled, and the majority of them are not getting paid. They're doing this for free. And all of their source code that they push every day is openly shared from day one. So you can easily just fork, and you have all of that IP for free. So the concept of IP no longer exists with some of these early adoption, if you look at the adoption cycle, right? Like the guys on the right and long tail of the curve, they no longer care about a lot of that stuff. It's because they understand that they'll eventually benefit from these incentive structures. So for them, open source is default. They don't think about open source as a hurdle to cross, as a step to make. Open source is obvious and a prerequisite, absolutely mandatory to these people, and they see the benefits from it. So I think for, again, people like Vitalik, developer relations is the business. So that concludes the posits. I want to leave you guys with this quote from the guy who wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I want to ask you guys to imagine a future where, quote, developer relations is the business. Imagine a future where the quality in a written technical spec or a very elegantly crafted talk that introduces a new, interesting technical concept becomes the key differentiator. That's it. Okay, sweet. I've been given permission to do a few questions. Do any of you guys have any questions? Or feel vehemently that I'm wrong? That's okay too. We can discuss. No questions? Go ahead.
When you say DevRel will be the business,
Yes.
do you see divisions of companies acting as business units running DevRel, or do you see entire companies spinning up, like finding out a way to turn DevRel into a business?
Both. The latter is already happening. Yeah. Super exciting.
Do you have examples of the latter happening?
I don't know specific names. And I think most of them are taking form as very highly specialized headhunting companies, which I think have naturally gone into DevRel as a very effective strategy to get very, very high quality engineers. And they're doing it as a byproduct of, I think, monetizing their business. But they're becoming DevRel companies where if you look at all of the tasks they do and all of the events they hold, they fall within the DevRel category. So that's the first generation. And I think more business models will come out around this. I haven't given that too much thought yet, but it would be very interesting to see how these future companies iterate on it. Cool. Any other questions? Any questions about Gojek, I guess? Go ahead.
You mentioned about headhunter doing DevRel business.
Yeah.
What do you think when the person who runs the headhunting business is not a DevRel perfect?
I think that's perfectly fine. We're also overgeneralizing software engineering here. There are so many different professions and so many different end goals. I think when I say headhunting, I'm thinking really specialized, kind of expert sourcing teams. I think for traditional recruiting, there's never a requirement on who starts these companies. Yeah. Yes.
Would something like consensus be an example of like how DevRel is the business? Maybe if you could just share a little bit more about like just for Ethereum, for example, like how it went from like there's a lot of developer relations involved in the adoption of Ethereum, and what's become like the key protocol.
Thank you, Daniel. So Ethereum evolved, maybe going back a few steps further, Ethereum evolved from the Bitcoin white paper many, many years ago. When that first launched, it was either a single person, Satoshi, or a group of people guising under the name Satoshi that did the DevRel in the beginning. Their strategy was they forwarded all of their papers to experts in the field, to academia, and once that started gaining traction, a lot of work went into building out the ecosystem, peer reviewing each other's work without any expectation of reward, hosting these conferences without any expectation of a turnout. And I think it's a very interesting ecosystem because it's so early stage, the evolution of this new protocol, that when you go to these conferences, you get a huge sense that at every step of the way, these developers are reminding themselves to let go of the ego that naturally comes. If you study game theory, I think that's what usually derails large communities from being able to work with each other. So that consensus, both the mathematical one and the philosophical one now, is underpinning this entire movement. And whether or not it really scales past 10,000 active developers, we really don't know. But how it's really evolved in the past really just 2 years is every single active contributor is spending a majority of his time doing developer relations, giving talks. And again, it's not just putting information out, but it's also taking feedback, right? And sourcing what the community and other developers are saying, iterating on the products that you've built and pushing that out. So I think in many ways, the community itself, if you plugged who all of the folks driving it forward and who all of the influencers are, very much look like the graph on the very right, the distributed graph. And again, whether or not it scales past the initial cohort of engineers, we've yet to see. But the fact that it's scaled to mesh network-looking things that are already this big is quite impressive, and I think historically very unprecedented. Never has such a big cohort of engineers gotten together to look at something like this. Go ahead.
So what do these patterns and predictions mean to companies like Gojek?
For us, it's quite simple. We have a lot of resources, and we're very privileged to contribute to this ecosystem. And one of the sentiments that we're trying to change internally as well is just open source things, right? Your code is never your IP. There's so much engineering redundancy that happens across technical organizations where we all think what we've built, it's the sunk cost fallacy, right? Where we think what we've built and dedicated our engineering team to build in the last 3 months is such a competitive differentiator, but it's often not. So my team, for example, spent the last 6 months, building OCR, optical character recognition. You essentially feed it an image of any type of ID, and it can extract the content, which is good from a fraud fighting perspective for me. But it's interesting in the sense that it took a lot of resources for us to build, but giving that out for free and just dumping that code in a GitHub repo and letting people have it for free, it doesn't hurt us in any way. But I think we have, as organizations and as executives, those of you guys sitting here, we have this natural fear. I think something gets to our throat when we think about outsourcing something like that. So I think for companies like Gojek, large companies, it's about overcoming a psychological hurdle and thinking about competition differently, right? Code, IP, never a competitive differentiator. It's not the code. It's your ability to be modular and iterate very quickly on the code. That's the differentiator. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to talent, which then is achieved through developer relations. So for us, long story short, I think just contributing more in a way that doesn't expect any immediate reward into the ecosystem. Cool. That's it. Any last questions? Cool, that's all. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Nicole. So basically, we're just going to run through today's agenda. We will have a few talks before we have tea breaks, and then in the afternoon, we'll split into 2 rooms for workshops, and you can ask as many questions as possible and during the Q&A as well. The code of conduct also on the website, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask any of the organizers. This event is inclusive, and we make it as diverse as possible and as comfortable and as cozy for everyone to network with each other. And our next speaker is Joe Nash from GitHub, and he's mildly jet lag. Is full of chili crab from last night, and is super excited to share with us about developing the next generation of open source developers. Let's get it with Joe.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. As Vanessa mentioned, my name is Joe Nash, and I'm the student program manager at GitHub. So I have the amazing job of helping GitHub student community do everything that they need to do. Any students in the room? I saw we had a bunch of student ticket sponsors, so hopefully got a couple. Nice, awesome, great to meet you all. And I'm going to be talking to you today about developer marketing at GitHub, particularly through the department that I work in, which is GitHub Education. I'm hoping to tell you a little bit about our student program and what it looks like. The keynote was wonderful, that whole section on how companies are engaging with universities. super relevant. I hope you paid attention to that. I'm going to be telling you about how we at GitHub do that, and hopefully leave you with some concrete steps so you can do the same. But I'm also very aware that students isn't necessarily an audience that fits every company, so along the way, I've tried to abstract the advice I'm going to give you to how you can work with all audiences and not necessarily just our student friends. So first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about us here at GitHub Education. Our mission is to help students, teachers, and schools access the tools and events that they need to shape the next generation of software development. And as we heard in the keynote, the next generation of software development is going to be, and already is, predicated on open source, especially for a company like GitHub. GitHub, the world's open source developers use GitHub and they put all of their software on GitHub, and that results in a lot of interesting things. Firstly, it enables all of the companies and the software companies of tomorrow to easily access that open source and to easily build companies very quickly. There's a fascinating article that I read recently by Nadia Egbal, who used to work at GitHub, but now she works at Protocol Labs, I believe. But she did this great analysis on the part that open source played in the Instagram acquisition, and found that the additional speed that open source gave to Instagram in developing their product added an approximate value of 150 million to that acquisition, because they're able to move that much faster. And platforms like GitHub enable everyone to access that. But equally, that also means for us here at GitHub, we have a huge responsibility where there is all of this open source out there in the world, and a lot of it has a very small number of people working on it. OpenSSL, quite famously, is a project that props up the world's internet infrastructure, and yet at one point that project had like 8 maintainers, and that's unacceptable, right? So for me, as a student program manager at GitHub, my job's about getting students into software development, into open source, but it's also about creating the custodians of our open source future. In 20 years' time, who's going to take over that vital infrastructure? Who's going to take over those projects? Well, I hope the student folks in the room, it'll be you. So, in a shorter line, our mission is to provide real-world tools for engaged students. And let's take a step back and look at some history here. 5 years ago, GitHub had 4 million users. As of very, very recently, we now have over 30 million. But GitHub Education in particular, 5 years ago, we didn't yet exist. John Britton, who created the team, hadn't yet joined GitHub. Well, he had joined GitHub, but the program hadn't really started yet. But now, today, there's over 1.1 million verified students on GitHub. And I say verified there because that's very important. That's only basically university and traditional school students, ones that we can verify go to an institution like a university, a college, or a high school. That doesn't include boot camps, self-taught people, MOOC students, which is why I've included this next line, which is that 50% of the signups that join GitHub self-identify as a student. So we're seeing this, actually was a really interesting stat that came out today. What was it? It was like one third of the GitHub users have joined in the last 12 months, or something like that. It was some stupid number. So half of that was identified themselves as students. So education is enormously important to us, especially when we consider that my team has 1.1 million students that we take care of and we support and we help them become software developers. So I'm going to take you on a very rapid journey through the different components of our program, how we support those students from first encountering software and learning about software collaboration, which is what GitHub's all about, through to entering the industry and hopefully getting their dream role. I'm going to break that down into 3 sections. First of all, we're going to look at how we equip students, how we provide them with the tools they need to learn everything they need to enter the industry. Then we're going to look at how we support education as a whole, how we help educate those students, how we equip teachers and universities to deliver compelling curriculums. Again, the keynote's super relevant there. And then finally, we're going to look at how we empower individuals themselves. How do we say to a student, hey, you're interested in DevRel, you're interested in whatever it is, come join us, come step into the industry, come step into our community spaces and learn what you need to learn. So let's kick off with Equip. And again, I want to go back a little bit and look at the founding of our team, the founding of developer marketing at GitHub. As I said, right now we have 1.1 million verified students. What does verified mean here? Well, we run a discount program. So students who come to GitHub get GitHub for free. That is important and obvious. And that program is the Student Developer Pack, this yellow backpack. But with the student developer pack, we do a little bit more than just give them GitHub for free. We also address their other needs around getting hold of the software they need to become professionals. I'll go into that in a minute. But I want to talk about how we got to a student discount program. There's lots of student discount programs out there. Why was one a good fit for GitHub? Well, to answer that question, I'm going to talk about the strategy that drives our team. As a developer marketing team, we are support-driven, and we follow a framework that John Britton laid out at DevRel Tokyo last year, and that framework is called SCOOP. And SCOOP stands for Support, Content, Outreach, Operations, and Programs. This is a framework that we follow every time we're addressing a new audience or every time, basically in our day-to-day lives. It's a cycle that we go over constantly and we iterate on constantly in order to design and deliver our developer relations program. And I'm going to take you through each step of SCOOP now. So it starts with support. We actually manage a support inbox, and we are actively engaged in support. Our team of 5 that helps 1.1 million students, we also manage the support inbox for those 1.1 million students. And as we're doing that support, we're looking at what our students are asking. What are the common questions? What is it they care about? What are their problems? And as we're looking at those questions, we're looking for patterns. And when we find patterns, we put a URL on it. If we see a repeated question, there's no point continuing to answer that in the inbox. We need to get content around that out in front of everyone so that question, first and foremost, doesn't come into our inbox as much. But then secondly, there's a kernel of something that people are interested in there. So let's get a URL in it, let's get a blog out, let's get a landing page out, let's answer that question in the open. And next comes outreach. We've had a common question, we've identified that pattern, we've created content to address that problem. Now we need to get it in front of people's eyes. We need to take it to events. A great example of this is the Git cheat sheet. If any of you have been to a GitHub-sponsored event, you'll have probably found a little blue A4 sheet that has all the common Git commands on it. That came from a really obvious problem. People at events and hackathons saying, how do I get started with Git? Well, we put a URL on it, and then we distributed it out to events to make sure that everyone was able to get hold of it. Then automations, and this is where the student developer pack really starts to come in. And I'll cover the student developer pack in particular in a moment. But once you start to build out this, you've got this repeated need, you've started to address that need, and you've started to get it in front of people, how do we then remove the human from that? How do we then, our small team, our very lean team with a lot of students, how do we automate all this stuff that we're distributing so that we can take a step back and start working on the next problem? Finally, once we've gone through those stages, we wrap it up, put a brand on it, and it becomes a program. So let's see how that happens live with the student developer pack. We're going to apply that to students. So the repeated question that John had, when John Britton joined GitHub, he was the education liaison, and he was basically given this huge inbox of student requests, and all the students were like, how do I get GitHub for free? And he was like, cool, I've got to answer all these emails. I was actually in Mexico last week for another conference, and I met a professor who 5 years ago was a student, and he actually said, like, oh, I got a student email. I got a student discount from GitHub like 5 years ago. I emailed this guy called John. So you can see kind of where we've come from, where now it's all automated, and back then it was an email. So the question we were getting a lot is, do you offer student discounts? So John answered thousands of these questions by hand, and that led him to think, this is silly. How do I get this out of my inbox? So he stuck up a landing page and started to offer a way that people could go and get their student discount. That question was answered, and there became a way to do it. And then he needed to get that message out, again, to stop it coming into his inbox, but also to start to increase that number, the number of students using GitHub. So we engage heavily with student hackathons. If you go to any hackathon in Europe or North America, you will see us there due to a partnership with Major League Hacking, fantastic organization. But we engage very heavily in student hackathons. We did over 200 of them last year, and hopefully we'll do more this year. So at this point, we've got a repeated support request. There's now content around it, and they've started to do outreach. But still, there's a lot of manual work there. That's 200 hackathons that we have to ship swag to. That's all these students that we have to manually verify. How do we operationalize that? Well, the student developer pack we then picked up, we then built infrastructure. So there's now a full-on app that powers our verification that's backed by contractors who do all the hard lifting of checking student IDs and making sure that they are actually a student. We track school domains, so we don't just do it based on, say, .edu, because that excludes a lot of students around the world. We look at individual schools, what domain they're using, and then we keep a record of those domains over time, so we know that if a student applies from them in 5 years' time, hey, we've seen this school before, it's a genuine school. And this stuff allows us to scale that program up. And as I mentioned Major League Hacking already, we then started to look for partners who are already working in this space who can distribute and help us get to those outreach opportunities. So Major League Hacking distribute all of our swag for us. We don't have to go out there and do that. And then, as I said, we wrap this in a brand, and it becomes a thing, and it became the Student Developer Pack. So that's great. We've taken a support need, and we've turned it into a program. The problem is solved. Well, not necessarily. We can't just wrap it up and call it a day there. We need to rescoop. We need to keep applying and finding new problems. And a problem that we kept running into is what happens to students when they graduate. They come and use GitHub, and then they leave. And obviously, from the business, we want those students to become successful, to get a job, to take GitHub into the industry, right? We want them to take GitHub with them. But if they don't become successful, if they don't get the job they want, if they don't have the opportunities they want, then GitHub's not going to go with them on that journey, right? So we had to start looking at things like, what does it take for a student in software engineering to get hired, and how can we help them? What are the things they need help with? And you look at things like the Linux Foundation Open Source Jobs report, we see numbers like 87% of hiring managers are struggling to find applicants with open source experience. And then when you look at the actual places they're looking for open source experience, the technologies they're interested in, we see some things that are really scary for students. We see that the top product, well, I mean, Linux is fine, but we see that some of the top areas they're looking to hire is cloud and web technologies and containers. Those things all have something in common, which is that they're super expensive. As a student, you can't just go get experience in the clouds. You can't go spinning up AWS servers every day of the week because you're living on ramen, right? So how does a student get experience in these things? These things, we can see that they're being hired for, but it's very hard to access for a student. They look a bit like this. So this is where we revisit the Student Developer Pack and we say, okay, we've got a need. Students can't afford this software that they need in order to be successful. How can we help them out with that? How can we rescoop? And that's where the Student Developer Pack, as it is today, came into being. We work with partners to offer a lot more than just free GitHub. We have AWS in there, we have DigitalOcean in there, we have Heroku in there, we have free domain names, we have free IDEs. Basically, there's $12,000 of free software, so that a student coming to GitHub doesn't just get a place to put their projects, they get everything they could possibly need to build and learn about their projects. So we look at the whole picture, from learning about our core product through to how do we actually make them successful and set them up to take us with them on their journey. And along the way, we're making sure that they're getting real-world tools. Everything in the pack is a real developer tool. A lot of them are stuff that we use ourselves. Datadog is a great example. Datadog got put into the Student Developer Pack after we started using them here at GitHub. And this results in engaged students, and we know this in the numbers. Students account for 4% of GitHub's user base, yet they account for 12% of the commits. An average student does 3 times more commits than a non-student GitHub user. And that's huge, and we can see this working. We have this kind of nice on-ramp where we don't just say to them, here's free GitHub repos, go wild. We say, here's free GitHub repos, now what are you going to build with it? Here's this huge list of things that you could start with. And we've had some great stories from some students. We actually have this out on a blog post. Take a picture of this link. This quote is, I found that as I progress through my academic and professional career, the Student Developer Pack is growing with me. This student, while they were in university, they built a platform called Athena. Using all the components of the Student Developer Pack, they basically were able to just kind of pick and choose as they went along. And this actually helped them land their first job straight out of uni. It's something they got to speak about, something they got to put in their CV, in their portfolio. And it helped them break into the industry. And we were along for that ride with them. So, summary of Equip is that users will tell you what they need. It's up to you to listen to them and then actually divine the need that works for your business and how you can apply that. I had mentioned that this framework, Scoop, was spoken about by John Britton. Take a picture of this slide. John's slides on Scoop and how we do our developer marketing and our strategy from DevRel last year are available at that link. This is a common pattern in this talk, by the way. After every summary, get your cameras ready. Cool, okay, on to educate. So here I want you to think about, where is your audience? Where is our audience? Where are students? I mentioned that we work with student hackathons, and so far I've spoken about working with students as individuals, people learning software and breaking into industry. But for us, there's a very obvious answer to where is our audience, and it's in the classroom, we hope, most of the time. I may or may not have been responsible for at least one student skipping class to come to one of our conferences. And this essentially comes down to something that we're all familiar with, which is, are we approaching our strategy from the bottom up or the top down? And here at GitHub Education, we try and do both. We work with individuals as students, we work with student clubs and student communities, but we also work with the universities, the administration, and the teachers to address their needs. And that's basically because teachers are a multiplier. We know that for every teacher that uses GitHub Education, they're going to onboard an average of 38 students on GitHub because they're using it in the classroom. And that's an important point. When I talk about teachers here, I'm not talking about helping them teach Git and version control. We do that as well. But I'm actually talking about them using the tool to teach. 20,000 teachers use GitHub to teach their classes. And what I mean by that is they use the tool to distribute assignments. They use it to mark assignments. If you think you're in a class, you're in a first year introduction to CS class, and you're a teacher, and you've got 200 students, and you have a Python assignment, you can email them all a zip file and ask them to upload it, or you can stick them all in a GitHub org, give them a repo with your Python exercise in it, and ask them to make pull requests. And pull requests, the way that we review code, we go line by line and we leave comments. That's a red pen on a piece of paper. That is perfect marking material, right? That's how teachers using the same mechanisms that we as developers use can really level up their teaching. And we've seen this in some really interesting ways. There's a teacher named Omar, I kind of got school he's at, that's terrible. But he uses continuous integration through Travis to automate the marking of his exercises. He uses unit tests to actually grade his assignments, which is magic. And this isn't unusual to the extent that Travis actually recently just made Travis free for universities because they see that happen so much. And that's super cool, right? We have every year we go to SIGSI. If we're thinking about the scoop of this, and we'll go into that in a minute, SIGSI's our outreach. SIGSI is the special interest group for computer science education, and there we work with people like David Malin, who, anyone familiar with CS50, the Harvard course that's available all over the world? It's a huge course. It's Harvard's Introduction to CS course, but David Malin also makes it available to any educator, and it's now taught in hundreds of universities to tens of thousands of students, and that whole course is run on GitHub. So why does this work? Why is this important? Well, we're providing, again, that real-world experience. We're saying to teachers, hey, have your students go through this workflow, and that's not just giving you a tool, it's giving them basically a workflow that will be useful for the workplace and open source. That's very important to teachers. A lot of schools rely on LMS systems, things like Moodle, things like, oh God, Blackboard, whatever they're called. And those tools are really useful for teachers. They do what teachers need, but they don't help the student. Once the student graduates, they're never going to see that software again. So if we can say to teachers, hey, you get your learning management system, and you can make your teaching easier, but also you're going to give your students valuable skills while you do that, that's a huge step up. As an example, I want to talk about Ayoma at the university in Gaiken University of Japan. This is Dr. Furuhashi. He's very involved with open mapping efforts and the Red Cross and the UN. And he runs a course on CS at the university where he basically gives students the task of encountering open source workflows and doing some mapping. Basically, they have a map in a GitHub repository, and students go to that map, and they label the map, and they identify, hey, this is a road, this is a hospital, this is whatever it is, and they actually add information to the map. What's super cool about this is this isn't an abstract exercise. This is a real UN project that they're working on to identify zones in crisis, and to help label those maps for emergency first responders. Furuhashi involves students directly in the open source communities he's a part of, in this case the UN and the Red Cross, and the result of this is that students' work actually helps authorities decide where to send resources. They did this recently for an earthquake in Japan in 2017, and the work that the students were doing, they were learning open source workflows, they were learning really cool things like open maps on these technologies, but then their work had real impact. And if you're thinking about making a difference to a developer or a student, if their path to learning actually achieves something real, like saving someone's life, how much more engaged are they going to be with what you have to offer? This last line is especially important. The work of the class is always relevant and urgent. That's one of the things that we see a lot. The keynote spoke a lot about MOOCs. One of the problems with MOOCs that is quite common is basically students drift off as real life becomes an impacting factor. But when you've got something that's like, hey, by the way, you're going to be learning and the work you do is going to save lives, that drift off and that engagement level is a little bit heightened. So this applies scoop to teachers. The question we're getting is, how do I run my class on GitHub? We provided content originally, which was this enormous teacher guide on like, hey, well, go set up a repo and then put this README in it, and then students will come and clone your repo. That filled a void, but it wasn't good enough. So I'm going to get back to how we address that in the program. But we took this guide to places like Sigsy and started talking to teachers where they are. This is another principle. Sigsy is a great example of a principle we have, which is making the living room. I mentioned that teachers are multipliers. There will be multipliers for your audience, people who result in many more developers. DevRel as a business is a great example of like, hey, if you're doing DevRel as a business and you're engaging with developer relations people, each developer relations person has an audience as well, right? So if you engage developer relations people, you trickle down. So when we make the living room, we find spaces where multipliers exist and where their spaces are, and we support that event, we support that place and make a gathering place for them. So we go to Sigsy. We then decided to automate our outreach, and we made a teacher swag bag. Basically, if you're a teacher and you come to our community forum and you say, hi, I'm a teacher, this is my class, this is what they do, this is what they're learning, we will send you a swag bag, no questions asked, for your class. And we get an enormous amount of tweets with teachers giving their whole class all the stickers and then making them pose for a photo for us. It's very sweet. But what this all ended up in is us taking all of that and saying the biggest problem here is that GitHub is hard to use for teachers. Let's address that problem and make that into a program, and that's where GitHub Classroom comes from. GitHub Classroom is an app built on top of GitHub using our external APIs. It's free and open source, and basically it means that if you're a teacher and you've got to distribute an assignment to 200 students, we make that easy. We create a link for you to give to your students. It creates a private repository for them, and you can just run with it. And then you as a teacher have a dashboard of all the students who have accepted your assignment. But what's interesting here is that this isn't where we stopped. We want to prove that this works, that this is useful, and we can ask our users that, but also we can engage in research on that. We do a study or a survey every year, and our most recent survey showed that 48% of students using GitHub in the classroom said that that helped them make them feel that they belong in the software development field, versus 31% of students who didn't use GitHub in the classroom. This survey is, I don't think I've got a link on it here, that's unfortunate. This survey basically covered a lot of different factors on how using GitHub in the classroom affected student outcomes, and we found that in almost every case, using GitHub in the classroom heightened those outcomes and increased their ability to participate and to learn. And having data like this is extremely important for this audience. If you think of teachers as an audience, they want that data. A lot of them are academic by trade, right? They want to know that what they're doing is effective. So when we make stuff like this, we go beyond marketing and dive into research to help make the case to them that this is something that's useful for them. So the summary of this section is that multipliers exist for your audiences, and they have their own needs, and a lot of them, in some cases, will have a different set of marketing that they respond to. If you want to watch some of our teachers talk about using GitHub in the classroom, this is the panel from Sigsy 2018. There's also on this same channel the panel from 2017. The 2017 one is the one where David Malin speaks from Harvard, if you're interested in that. Cool. Let's talk about empowering people. We're going to go back round to the bottom now, to bottom up, to working with students and helping them directly. And this all comes down to the question of how do we motivate people? How do we motivate someone to use GitHub? How do we motivate someone to engage with open source? I strongly believe that comes down entirely to opportunity. If you think about open source, why do open source developers do all of this free work? Well, some of it's passion for the craft, but a lot of it increasingly nowadays is that open source opens doors, right? Lots of companies will recognize you for your open source work, and they'll say that, oh, hey, we use that project, that's really cool. And a lot of my colleagues at GitHub, I can name people like our VP of design is Mark Otto, who made Bootstrap. We've got Mike McQuaid from Homebrew. Like this list can go on and on and on. Tenderlove from Rails. Open source provides opportunities for people, and that's why it works. So we should take that lesson into our developer relations programs and make sure that we provide opportunities for people. When you have a developer relations program and you have some docs that tell about your product, you'll give them the opportunity to use your product, sure, but can we go a bit further than that? So how do we create opportunities? How do we make sure that we're doing a little bit more than just letting people use our product? How do we make sure that we're helping them in their goals and their life? Let's apply Scoop to that. Questions that we get all the time from student leaders are things like, how can I get a GitHub workshop on my campus? How can I get into open source? How can I come to GitHub Universe? This is a set of repeated questions that we get that all portray an opportunity. They're all someone asking for something that we are experts in or that we can provide, but is beyond the scope of our actual product and our actual developer tools. And so we made a program to address this need, a little bit more abstract, a little bit further away, but that builds on our other programs. And that program is the GitHub Campus Experts. And this is what my day-to-day is working on. And to put it in the words of a former campus expert herself, the GitHub Campus Experts program is fostering communities that promote learning, building, and sharing in technology on a global scale. In my words, a campus expert enriches the technology community at their school. Campus experts are students that we train to build communities on schools. And notice I've done a couple of things there. Firstly, I'm talking about something that looks like a student ambassador program, but I have not mentioned in any of these descriptions our brand or our product, right? That's very, very, very important. And if I had time in this deck to address common errors with student programs, it would be addressing only brand and product. But let me break down what the Campus Experts does for students. First of all, when you first join the program, the application to join the program is actually our training. You go for a training course that empowers you to become a leader and basically learn how to build communities. We cover topics like, what is this word community? What does a community mean? Inclusivity and diversity, public speaking, like instructional design. So we teach people how to teach people, and then obviously we also cover Git. And when we hear about experts in this, when we hear from students in this training, we hear things like this. This Campus Experts training has helped me greatly. It helps me to concentrate, improve my writing skill, my public speaking skill, and the way I think. I had no serious knowledge about my community before I applied. Now I have the key to impact my community. So next up, they've done the training, they become a Campus Expert. What do they get? We give them resources to inspire and motivate their peers so that they can engage with learning. We hear from a lot of students that like, hey, my teacher doesn't teach this X JavaScript framework, or I don't cover that. And like, that's fine. Your teacher shouldn't be covering new JavaScript frameworks. That's not knowledge that's going to help you in 50 years' time. What is going to help you in 50 years' time is if you make that space yourself and you empower your peers and help peer learning. Spaces like this are how technology works, right? We move as an industry very, very quickly, and the only way any developer is able to keep up with trends is through our community spaces. So by empowering students to build those community spaces, we start them on that journey a lot earlier, and we also help them learn topics that shouldn't be addressed in a computer science course. This is a picture of Daniel in India giving a workshop with his bright red Campus Experts hoodie on. We help them with whatever they need. During the training, they write a proposal for how they'll improve their campus, and we commit to that proposal. So if they say, I'm going to do a workshop every week on Python, JavaScript, whatever, we're like, cool, we'll be there with the pizza money and the swag, whatever it is that you need. And then third up, we provide them opportunities from GitHub to help them take their next step, reaching more people or finding your future. This is things like taking them to conferences with us.
He doesn't believe that there's one size fits all, and he will shine a light on dark matter developers. Take it away.
Hello, hello. All right. Make sure this works. Sweet. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for sharing your time with me. Thank you, Nicole and Joe. I think you set an awesome foundation for the discussions that we're going to have today. I certainly learned a lot and can't wait to talk to Joe about getting Twilio Quest in that developer pack. Today I want to talk about dark matter developers, but a little bit about me. My name is Jared Reyes. I work out of San Diego, California, and I have the privilege of serving the developer evangelism team at Twilio. Twilio's developer relations team consists of 3 teams. We have the developer education team, which is the team that runs the documentation and Twilio Quest. We have the developer community team, which handles the blog and our community projects. And then we have the developer evangelism team. which is the team that I serve. Our mission on the developer evangelism team is to inspire and equip developers to change the future of communications. So very relevant content I've heard so far today, and I'm very excited to share with you some of our learnings. Now, the term dark matter developers was actually coined by Scott Hanselman at Microsoft a few years ago, and it's a great metaphor. I'm so glad he came up with this, because dark matter, as we know, reveals itself in the science of our universe, but is not observable. And he says dark matter developers are those developers that do not involve themselves in our community. So they don't come to our conferences, they don't come to our meetups, they don't read our blog posts, et cetera, et cetera. At Twilio, we've simplified this a little bit to just be developers that we should be, but aren't currently serving well. And I think that if we look at the data, we see that developers, the delta between the developers we think we serve and the developers we're actually serving is quite large. So who are we serving? Well, we'd like to think it always looks like this, but it often looks just as much like this, which is developers that we think we serve are probably people we think like to see balls light up and go to tech conferences. And even though rooms are becoming more diverse and as the global developer population grows, I think we're tempted to think that we're serving a broader audience, but the data suggests that we aren't. So a little bit of background here. 5 years ago when I joined Twilio, I started digging into the data, and our team found that 23% of the community created 95% of the activity. So only a few developers were creating all of this content and using our API a ton and reading our documentation and reading our blog posts and coming to events. And these developers obviously are in the sweet spot. These are the people that we're serving really well. These are the developers who write in the languages that we support. These are the developers who like to come to events. And I think we've all met developers that maybe fit in that category. Actually, I need to do something real quick. So I have these cards here, and I'm going to have a couple helpers pass these out. A few of my colleagues are here. This is Shabbat. He works at Twilio. If you have questions about Twilio, find him later. Any other volunteers? So I'm going to pass these cards out, and these cards actually represent the global developer population. I wrote a script last night that used the global developer data to generate a developer, because as we have this conversation, I want to make sure we're being as specific as possible. I think we all tend to think of large populations as developers, and we'll probably talk about that large population a lot today. But I think when it comes to changing our belief systems, it's very important to get very specific. So you can think of these as developer personas. And these personas are going to show things like age, gender, whether they speak English, what their programming language is. And this will help us frame the conversation moving forward. So if the devs that were creating all that content were in a sweet spot, how do we increase the number of developers in that sweet spot? I think we do this by challenging our assumptions. So what are our assumptions? Well, we, of all people, know that an image search of developer does not represent developers. We, of all people, know that an image search of developers does not capture the diversity of the roles. There's everything from IT, engineering. We hear a lot of different roles when we talk about developers, and I want us to be specific when we're thinking about this, but this conversation is not about what we know, it's about what we don't know. So, let's meet the developer that you have in your card. I want you all to read that, look at that, and I want you to ask yourself, does this developer just like me? This is skipping a lot, sorry about that. Is this developer just like me? Is there, just a show of hands, does anyone have a card where the developer is just like them? Okay, good. I was going to swap out if you did, because that wouldn't work. Because of course, developers are people, and we're all different. And in this talk, we're going to challenge some of the assumptions we have about developers in order to better understand how we could better serve them. So, here's some 4 leading questions that we can use to challenge our assumptions about the developers we serve. I'm going to start with the first assumption, the first question: does the developer have everything they need to use your product? So some assumptions that you might hold, that we certainly held at some points in Twilio's history, is that developers, mostly on Mac, developers hate talking to sales, and developers love our site and love our docs. And you probably have heard some of this. If you haven't, you're awesome. But we certainly had these assumptions. We see tweets of people loving our docs, etc. Well, if you look at the data, only 18% of developers use Mac. So how are you making sure that your documentation represents all of the different ways to write something in terminal? How are you making sure that your content is serving developers who are Linux first or who are using completely crazy OSs? But more than that, if you go to your website and you visit, for your own product, and you visit Audience, you go on the Technology tab, thank you Google for building an amazing analytics tool, and you look at Browser and OS, you can get this data for your own company. Figure out how many of your developers are using different platforms. For Twilio, all of our developer relations use Macs, but only 21% of our developers use Macs. So this is one of those areas, like Joe said, where use the products that you want to build for, and you can better serve those developers. I think this is one place that we could certainly improve on our team. What about sales? Well, when we looked at the data, we realized that 1 out of 10 developers talk to sales and support in the life cycle of them using Twilio. This is completely at odds against the way that we serve these developers, because if you do want to talk to sales or support, you have to leave the developer life cycle on our product in order to do that. You have to go navigate off the documentation or navigate off the blog in order to do this. So we could certainly be better serving these developers. And these are not the developers that we're talking to, obviously, because they're talking to sales. And then lastly, developers love our site and docs. One thing that you may have been seeing recently is a move to make sure that your website's more accessible. It turns out that up to 20% of your visitors could have accessibility needs. They could be colorblind. They could have stimulation issues around lots of overstimulation, and they could have a hearing deficit. So if you want to check your tools, go to web.webaim.org. That's one tool to use, but it'll rate your site. It'll show you all the areas in which you're not serving accessible developers. This is somewhere that we've made a lot of strides in the last few years, and I think you'll find that the developers who aren't coming to your site because they can't use it are dark matter developers that you could better be serving. So, if you look at your card real quick, every time we see this slide, I'm going to kind of pause and let us just reflect on this. If you could look at your card and just think about how you could better serve that developer to better use your product, I think that would be great. Does anyone want to say one thing on the card that they think they aren't serving very well right now? Yes, Joe.
Age 65.
There you go. Yeah, there's we'll talk about this later, but the developer population globally is aging, even though there are millions and millions of students entering the field. Globally, developers are aging, and that means that a lot of them are parents. It turns out 80% of developers over 35 say they have dependents. So we'll talk about that later, but yes, certainly thinking about how you can better serve an aging developer is super important, because we're all going to be there. So the next question I pose for all of you is, can the developer understand your content? Some of the assumptions that we hold here is that developers are college educated, that developers are English speaking, and developers are on desktop, which they should be, right? I mean, come on. But no, if you dig into the data, you'll find that 30% of developers never attend college level. They never finished college. So when you, sorry, I skipped a slide again. So some of the data that you can pull up for yourself to decide if you're serving these developers well is to look at the bounce rate per language for your website. So this is a report that'll show you, based on the language that Chrome or Safari set for your developer, or Firefox, that it'll show you how likely they are to bounce. And if they're bouncing, that means they're not using your product. That means they are leaving the flow completely, and they're never going to get the wisdom you have to share. The other thing you can look at is pages per session by language. This report will tell you how many pages they're looking at, how engaged in the content are you. Kind of one trick to tell if someone's a highly engaged user that we use is we look at a developer who's viewed more than 3 pages and been on the website for more than 3 minutes. This is kind of like inside baseball here for a lot of tech companies, but this is a great way to find the audience that's creating the largest conversion for you. And it turns out that if in Portuguese, developers are spending a lot less time on the website and they're bouncing a lot more. So how could we better serve Portuguese developers? We certainly could be translating the content for them. This is not true for all English as a second language developers who are using our website. There's lots of communities that are growing very quickly, especially in APAC. But we know that there's developers we aren't serving well based on this report, and I would encourage you to dive into the data yourself and figure out if you need to prioritize a language to be translated for your documentation and content. So these assumptions. Developers are college educated. 31% never finished college. So is there assumptions that we're making in our content about a shared CS language? Are we assuming that developers know what a big O is and how to bubble sort? Or are we starting every developer on page 1? So if you haven't read Every Page is Page 1, written by Mark Baker. It's a book that is a little dated now, but certainly has a very important tenets of how to write technical content so that everyone is being onboarded with every piece of content that you create. Every developer is English speaking. Are you translating your content? Because 30% of developers do not speak English at all. And are you creating a website that works on mobile? I was just viewing a page on maybe our site that wasn't rendering on mobile. So I will definitely hit up the team that manages that page. Because 1 out of 5 developers that are visiting our site are not using desktop. And certainly using our console on mobile is quite difficult to do. Even though our documentation now does have language samples on mobile, our console has a way to go. So, one action item you can take from this section is to remove any unnecessary barriers to a developer understanding your content. Remove technical jargon that is not necessarily informative to someone who's starting on page 1, and go get that book. Again, think about the developer that's in your card right now, and think about if there's a way you could better serve content to them. Does anyone see anything on their card they think they could better serve that developer with their content? Yeah, Tom. Impaired, yeah. So up to 20% of your visitors could be impaired. So think about how your content, how site readers view your content. Are you using alt tags on your images? Are you using form labels on your forms? These are all really important to creating better content. Man, sorry about this, guys. Y'all. Okay, so the next question is, do developers respond to your brand? If you work for GitHub, you can just stop listening right now because they do. So this is close to the heart of the work that our team does and that maybe your team does. But we all have different tactics. We all have different communities that we're reaching out to. But I think all of us would agree that we want developers to think of and feel something when they see our brand. You might want them to love your brand. You might want them to respect your brand. You might want them to think of your brand as the highest in quality or the highest in ease of use. Whatever it is, you want them to respond to your brand. So some of the assumptions we held, and you might hold here, is that developers who are viewing your brand work in tech, or developers are lifestyle developers. This is a term that just means these are developers who, they code after they go home, and they code as a hobby. They commit to open source. They go to events. They go to meetups. If you look at the data, this is not necessarily true. So most developers around the world are working in anything but tech. Most of them are working in healthcare, governments. The list goes on, but recently there was an article that showed that Goldman Sachs has more developers than Facebook, and I don't think any of us would think of Goldman Sachs as a tech company. So when you're advertising and meeting these developers out in the wild, Are you promoting the developer lifestyle? Are you talking about just living for code and just being a code ninja, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I think this is something we can all quickly change about the way we talk about our brands, but there is certainly a difficult barrier here of reaching these developers if you aren't already engaged in the community that they're in to some degree. So the first step is probably going outside of the bubble that you might have created or that you haven't even realized is there, and reaching out to the developers that are outside of tech. What about lifestyle developers? So 85% go outside, that's a joke. 64% have never skipped a meal to remain productive. This is, I don't know if everyone holds this assumption, but certainly when I was on engineering teams in my early career, there was an assumption that like the best developers just go hard all the time. And I think that's important if you're, I think it's important to hustle in order to stay on top of the ever-changing technical landscape, but you should never be skipping a meal. And it turns out people aren't. So that's important. And then 50% of developers have never contributed to open source. Hopefully that'll change, but in the meantime, don't assume everyone knows about the tools you're talking about. Don't assume everyone knows what NPM is. Again, start on page 1. So here's 2 things you can do to determine whether developers are responding to your brand. These are actually 2 things we've already implemented. One is a brand survey. So just go out and ask developers, have you heard of us? Do you know who we are? It turns out if you do this, you'll learn that they don't. There's probably a few of you who developers know your brand across the globe, but for Twilio certainly this is not the case. Not every developer has heard of us. And this will give you an insight into which industries and into which verticals you can approach because you know they need your tool, but they don't know about you yet. It can actually be a huge business lead. The next thing is to create an event survey. This year we've started to implement a gate to getting a free t-shirt at events. And that gate is simply, will you answer a quick SMS text survey? So we'll send you just text a number and we'll ask you 5 questions about who you are. We'll ask you your job title, we'll ask you why you came to this event, we'll ask you a couple other things about who you are. And it turns out 95% of people are willing to do this. So before we were just handing out t-shirts, and now we're just getting a ton of data about why these developers are here. And this has been hugely influential in the way that we decide which events to go to, because at some events, everyone's heard of us, and at some events, they haven't. And obviously, we want to prioritize the events where we can serve developers in a new way, so we're going to prioritize those events where people hadn't necessarily heard of us before. If you do want to do an event survey, you could easily build a text-based survey. There's a great tool to do that. So here's your 1 action item, and if you're GitHub, you're already doing this. You kind of led the way here. But do something surprising with your swag. This year we created our developer relations, Alex. He does the work for us when we're not there. It's like he, she, sorry, Alex is our non-gendered name that we came up with. We know that developers identify with things that make them unique and not necessarily with their work. So we created swag that would allow developers to self-identify as being Star Wars fans or 90s pop culture fans. We created a sticker for our Signal conference of a skateboarding Alex. We know developers love to lie in pools in Cabo. So think of one piece of swag that you can create this year that helps developers identify with something outside of their work. Maybe it's gardening. Maybe it's hot air balloon driving. Do you drive hot air balloons? Or? I don't know. And by the way, we've seen a huge ROI in these stickers. We get tweets about our swag like never before. People love that we're creating something that's different and that they can say, oh yeah, that's me. I recognize that. So again, think about your developer. I'm going to speed through this because I got a little bit more. So the last question I have for y'all is, are developers showing up to meet you? I think this is really at the heart of what Scott Hanselman was trying to say, right? He was trying to say, there's developers that aren't coming to meet us. I hope I've opened that definition a little bit more beyond that, but this is still very important to the work that we do. And in this year specifically for Twilio, this has been something that we've asked ourselves honestly, and we've made a lot of changes that hopefully will help you do the same. So one, here's an assumption we have. If we build it, they will come. I literally saw a Medium blog post with this title like 2 weeks ago. 2, San Francisco is a great city. No comment. This is being recorded, so I'm not saying anything. So if you look at the data, age of users year over year, another analytics report, we actually run this in Heap as well, you will find you may find that developers that are using your tool are aging. Well, we know globally, according to Evans data and Stack Overflow's survey from this year, that the global median developer is 35, up from 6 years ago where they were 31. And again, 80% of developers over the age of 35 say they have dependents, so someone at home that they care for, whether it's an elder or whether it's a child. So, how can you better serve parents? Very interesting question. Let's talk about that in a minute. Secondly, one thing I want to make sure comes across in this section is that we should be surveying people and asking them about the retention and whether they enjoyed something after we implement that change. There's a quote that one of my colleagues said, which is, building managers never ever say to her, oh yeah, accessibility, that's a problem we have all the time. They're like, no, we've never had an accessibility problem. We don't have an accessible bathroom, we don't have ramps. It's just not a problem we've ever had. And of course, that's because people aren't coming to those events where their accessibility needs are not being met. It turns out that some populations are so underserved that their lack of existence in certain communities is seen as completely normal. And this is somewhere that we have started to really be honest about and think about, well, if we do make these changes, do more people show up? So we actually sponsored childcare, an event, and before we did this, we were at an event where childcare was not offered, and we asked developers, how likely would you be to make a decision about coming to an event if childcare were provided? And 24% said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. But then we asked the same question after we implemented childcare in an event, and 91% of people said, this is why I came to this event. So the delta between the people that were not there before and the people that were there after was huge. People can't come to an event if they have to make lunches the next day, if they have to take care of all the things that they have to as a parent. So we're going beyond this, and we're starting to sponsor lunch making meetups where parents can come to meetups. We give them all the fixings they can have for the next day's lunch. They bring their own bags for their kids, and then they leave the meetup with a little bit more technical skills and a lunch packed for their kids the next day. So I mentioned age before. Here's actual Google Analytics data for our website, and the fastest growing populations using Twilio are 45 and up, which means we need to think about how we are creating quickly consumable content for that person who probably has a lot going on in their lives. And we need to make sure that we are creating events where we are thinking about parents. So there's one more thing here, which actually Joe made me think of, which is the student developer, as he mentioned, GitHub makes them feel like they are part of a community. Well, the data suggests that it takes 5 years for a developer to feel comfortable in their role. That imposter syndrome actually starts to dip after 5 years. People start to feel more like a developer and more like they know what they're doing. And that's just the simple nature of being around other developers and realizing, none of us know what we're doing. And so I think when you're thinking about having developers show up, make sure you're creating safe, welcome spaces. Make sure you're creating spaces where you're not assuming everyone is a professional and you're not assuming everyone knows everything. And this includes creating spaces for people to self-identify as needing help. Make sure you have lots of info desks around and lots of areas for someone to say, I actually don't know what's going on, can someone help me? This is something that I think we could do better. But San Francisco is a great city. Actually, when you're talking about throwing events, it's not. One of the things that I think is a misnomer, and this is not just true for San Francisco, it's true for whatever metropolitan you're in, is that if you just put something in the middle of the city, developers will come to it. That's not necessarily true. You need to make sure that it's accessible through transit. You need to make sure that the cost of staying at a hotel is not prohibitive. We actually have a hard time giving away free tickets to our conference for out-of-towners if we throw it in San Francisco, because the simple nature of us having a conference in San Francisco means the hotels go from affordable to $600 a night, which is just prohibitive for a lot of people, especially students and especially people who are not being sponsored to go there to show up. So think about where you're having the space. If you can, do a satellite version in populations that you know would love the content. And don't do it in San Francisco. We still throw our conference in San Francisco, so I'm probably going to hear about that. So one action item here is to, in the next 6 months, I would encourage you all to sponsor one thing at an event, whether you're recruiting, whether your developer relations is marketing. Just find an event in your city that needs to be served and sponsor something that broadens the possible audience that might attend. So sponsor transit, make sure people have GoJet credits, sponsor captioning, and sponsor childcare. We have started to do this year, and the response has been overwhelming. It's going to take a while for people to believe us and trust us that we care about this, but I think over time we'll see that more and more people show up to these events because they'll see it as a welcoming, safe space. You'll see more data about this in the next few months as the team starts to publish more data around this, but I think it's very promising so far. So hopefully today you have thought about your developer and we have shined a light on it. And I hope you leave with one action item today that'll help you broaden the number of developers who you're talking to so that you can have a broader definition of what a developer is. Thank you again. My name is Jared Reyes, and you can find me at Level Up later today and in the back of the room at any point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jared. So we will have a tea break right now, and we will resume our regular programming at 11:30 a.m. Thank you.
I got it. Oh, no. Yeah, I got it. It's right here. Boom.
So welcome back. So I'm a dog person, and the next speaker is totally a cat person. The first thing she did when she landed in Singapore was to take a photo of a Singapore cat. And she has lots of stories about her cat as a service platform. So Tomomi Imura is from Slack, and she's not going to share about cats today. What she's going to share is about dealing with global teaching methods to reach out to developers. Over to you.
Thank you. Woo. All right. Good morning. Yeah? Everybody having fun so far? Had a good coffee break? All right? Cool. Okay, let's see. All right, so today I'm going to talk about developer education, and I'm focusing on more like developer, like diverse developers and different learning styles, because we all learn things differently. Again, my name is Tomomi Mura, and that's my, the girly Mac is my Twitter handle. So yeah, many times I go with the girly Mac as one word, where, you know, like GitHub and everything, where, you know, it doesn't support the underscore. But anyway, on Slack, not a Slack, I mean on Twitter, my handle is girly_Mac. Anyways, and I'm a developer advocate at Slack, and I'm from San Francisco, which is not a good city, right? It's a good city in general, I would say. All right, so a little bit about myself. So I've been doing DevRel for, it's like 8 years-ish so far. So currently I'm working at Slack, and previously I was in some startups, including like Nextmo, and before that I was in a big corporate, like mobile phone companies. And yeah, I've been in the mobile industry for a while. So before I switched on DevRel, I was actually doing engineering, like front-end engineers before. But I still consider myself as an engineer, I believe. You know, I still code. All right, so hashtag DevRel life. Many times when we're talking about our daily lives, you know, well, we often, you know, tweet about some fancy stuff, like, you know, like try to show off some sort of like jet-setting lifestyle and such. And that's what everybody's thinking, like even my colleagues, you know. My colleagues in other department thinks all we've been doing is like traveling around the world, having fun, having party and all those. But that's, well, it's true in some way, but I would say it's some sort of illusions, because real DevRel life, it's, you know, far more than that. So of course we've been doing so many other works, you know, in our daily lives. So one of the stuff is creating awareness. It's quite important, you know, when you have, let's say you're working in startups that nobody else have really heard of, and not many people have heard of. In some cases, you know, maybe you work in a company, it's already been well known, and the brand name is already been out there, but maybe you have like new features, new product, you have to get the awareness and everything. And giving the inspiration is one of the other things to do too. You know, we go up on a stage and inspire the developers out there and try to encourage them to use your product, or maybe there's some technologies you're advocating. And of course, outreach, engineering is a part of things we do, and product feedback is quite important. It means we have to listen to our developers and talk to, you know, internal engineers to promote like developer experiences and everything. And yeah, create an ecosystem is quite important for some of the companies who has something like app stores. You know, for us at Slack, we have an app directory. So, you know, getting the ecosystem is quite important for us. And support, and the developer education. And there's so many other things we're doing, but let me talk about developer education here. So like again, my focus is creating like educational content for developers. So this is my cat, Jamie. I'm trying to teach my cat how to code. Or maybe not. I think my Mac is just so hot, so my cat is using it as a heating pad. All right, it's just my obligatory cat slide, because if I don't use any cat pictures, people's gonna tweet at me later on and say, "Mommy, you didn't use a cat picture." So, all right, I just throw it in. Our goal of creating educational content for developers is obviously make it easy for developers to understand that, like API, could be API, SDKs, tools, platforms, whatever you are advocating, to build apps and services, etc. But, well, the how and where do developers learn? So I have a few statistics out here. So this is a survey conducted by Stack Overflow this year. And according to them, most of the developers learn from official documentation. And secondly, it's a Stack Overflow. Well, yes, because this survey is done by Stack Overflow, so I expected to see really high number here. And then the books and some online help, the chat rooms could be learned directly from people, like colleagues and friends. And some people have luxury of taking classes or, pay somebody to teach to them, which is nice. And here's another data from somebody else. It's actually from /data. So they're selling this data. So, well, this is just a part of the free sample they provided to us. So it doesn't really have actual figure here. But as you can see, something quite similar there. So, but interestingly, YouTube is quite high there. So yes, a lot of developers learn from videos. And we've conducted some similar research too. So we have a group of researchers who's usually doing user research. But this time we asked them to conduct some survey for developers. So this is really only for Slack developers, not like developers out there in general. So yes, so this is not really meant to be for public, so I can't really disclose actual figures and everything. So this is not exact, but sort of. So 80% and developers, like our developers, learn from documentations. And well, the Stack Overflow, it's still popular. So, and a third-party tutorial. And also some code samples and such. And some developers do learn from Twitter, which is interesting. But I do get a lot of random questions from random people on Twitter, so I guess that works as support system. But then, okay, let me go back. As you can see, this is again, we did this survey with the Slack developers, so we expected like everybody reads the documentations, right? But the thing is, it's not 100%. So many times we just shut it out, let's get RTFM when we get some basic questions. It's just read the effing manual. But the thing is, maybe we shouldn't. I mean, maybe documentation's not really working for everybody. Maybe just some developers think it's just hard to understand from our own docs. So, how do people learn most efficiently? So I am adapting something called the VARC model theory. It's the study done by Fleming and Mills in the 90s. So this is this is about like general learning style. There are 4 different patterns or kinds of styles, I would say. Visual, and auditory, read-write, and kinesthetic. So visual learners, they prefer depiction of information in maps, diagrams, chart, graphs, flowchart, and such. Basically anything visual, right? So let me use this example with like how to roll sushi. So this is some nice illustrations. So how describing how to roll sushi. And some developers find it's easiest way to learn how to cook. Next one is auditory. So auditory learners prefer the information that is heard or spoken. So they learn best from lectures, group discussion, radio, and such. So maybe the video can be visual too, but those learners rather learn by listening things. So in this case, maybe watching YouTube, maybe listening to YouTube, or maybe like podcasts or something might be the easiest way for them to learn how to roll sushi. And third one's read and write. So those people prefer information displayed as words. So this preference emphasizes like text-based input and output, and reading, writing in its all forms, but especially manuals. So I guess those learners better just read the recipe books. And the fourth one is the kinesthetic. So perceptual preference related to the use of experience and practice, and either through concrete personal experience, example, practice, or simulation. So that can be done either, real life, like real experience, or could be simulated online and such. And I believe those learners probably prefer taking cooking classes to learn how to roll sushi, right? So yeah, so why not, applying this theory for developers? It's perfectly working for that too, because we all have visual learners, visual learning developers out there. So we have some effective elements that we can use for those learners. Using diagrams, images, screenshots, GIF animations. I pronounce it GIF, so don't argue with me. GIF animations, videos and screenshots. I said, oh yeah, screenshots over there, screencast. So this is an actual diagram we've been using on our Slack documentation site. So it's just, besides actual API documentations, we have something called Slack API blueprints, which I maintain. And that actually, not just explaining how API works, it's more like supplying like use cases and code samples and describing how that code sample works. So for some engineers, they just rather look at the flow, like software sequence flow like this, than just reading some blah, 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 blah in some sentences, right? Or it could be some illustrations like this. So this is something I actually created for documentation, API doc, describing how like third-party bot works on shared channels. And of course, we have a written doc that explains how the / command works and to shared channels. But I just created this illustration to, show that how it works easily. Because, like again, some people prefer looking at this image rather than just reading a few sentences. Oh yeah. If it's not a cat, I use raccoon pictures. Because trash pandas are cute. Yeah, they're dirty, yes. But anyways, so so this is animation created from actual screens explaining how the message action works. So beside what we do, there are some examples I'm going to show what other companies doing. So I particularly found Amazon Alexa as using more diagrams and screenshots than any other Amazon like properties like AWS and other services. Maybe because Alexa involves the hardware, so maybe just describing with diagrams so much easier when it's things get more complicated. And also Nexmo has a lot of diagrams too. So that's a company I was working previously. So the company is actually really a platform as service companies, and they're targeting a lot of enterprise developers. And there are so many products, but sometimes just describing what products are itself is not really easy. So using a diagram might be the best way for some people to understand what they are. Like, it's not really even explaining each details, anything too complex, but still it really helps what the company offers. Now this is my favorite one, so Adafruit. So they sell hardwares like microcontrollers and like circuit boards and stuff. And they use a lot they have really great tutorials with a bunch of pictures. And not just the pictures, like this example showing which way the data flows. So which side to wire correctly and stuff. And the next example is auditory. So effective elements for auditory learners will be just giving lectures speaking at conferences, meetups, video would be really great help. Like again, that can that can work with visual learners as well. And webinar, live cast, and podcast might be a good example. So this screenshot here is actually the webinar, or I should go live cast, I've done with Google Cloud team. And talking about the videos, what I admire most is the Microsoft Channel 9. They have really a great set of videos, educational videos. And well, great thing about it is they're really in good quality because they have an actual studio in their campus, which made me really jealous because, wow, you know. So that's something, you know what, so at the Slack, we don't have any video content, so we really try to get some, you know, a production going, but obviously we don't have a studio and such, so, well, let's see. Well, some companies using some other platform, like third-party platforms like Udemy and other companies. So this screenshot is actually some Unity. They have courses on Udemy. And read and write, I think this is the most common one. So what effective elements for the read-write learners are documentations. So that's why I say common, because everybody have documentations, I believe. And then besides documentations, well, we can probably have like written tutorials on technical articles, or maybe books. And the source code and forums may not be working for read and write learners, but I just include them. And I'm not including an example here because, like, again, I think everybody have documentations. And kinesthetic is another one, and the fourth element. So effective elements for kinesthetic learners can be a real-life coding experience, right? So supporting coding experience by maybe online from code samples. It could be in person, like workshops and labs. A hackathon might be a great example. And also, I believe interactive docs and tutorials can be a kinesthetic, because one of the good examples is a Stripe. Their documentation is not just same old like regular static documentation you just consume, like just read and understand. They supplied something like interactive, sort of like code sample, so you can tweak the code sample and see what happens, result. So people actually use hands to learn, you know, they see how the API works. So that is really a great example for kinesthetic learners, especially compared with just the rewrite, you know, regular documentation. So supporting all that, you know, like different learning styles, it's not that easy and I have a lot of work to do. So, but what you can do is recycling content you already have. So let's say you have code sample on GitHub. So why don't you just reuse this content and creating something else? So first things to do is readme.md. Well, obviously, I mean, if you have a code sample, I often see some repos with no readme file. This is really a bad idea because even if your project or whatever just having a code sample is really awesome, but without a readme file, no one knows what it is and no one knows how to use it. So you must have readme, and that can be working as a documentation. And also you can create a written tutorial from that too. A video tutorial maybe just some sort of screencasting can be cheaply done. Maybe you have a webinar, or maybe you make a slide and talk about it in conferences. Or if you have a whole lot of code samples, why don't you give workshop? So I just talked about some learning styles, but next I'm talking more about like people, focusing on more people. So what is really developer diversity? I feel like I can even skip those slides because you already have learned a lot from Gerald earlier. Yes, a lot of overlaps here, but again, just let's recap it. So yes, developer diversity. Well, of course, people diversity counts. So gender, race, age, and everything, that's all counts. And a cultural background. Yeah, so we are from so many different backgrounds here. But especially for developers, yes, academic background might be one of the factors, like, do your developers have CS and computer science degree or not, or college educated or not? And it could be the coding proficiency and experience. Yeah, some are newbies, some are super experienced. So we want to obviously support everybody, all the newbie. We can't just leave any new developers behind. And the industry they are working at. Yeah, that can be software, hardware, or maybe non-tech. Yes, obviously many developers are not working in tech industries. It could be finance. Well, they are fintech, but it's more like old banking companies count too, right? And medical, government, pharmaceutical, so many other companies have engineers. Then language, and both coding languages like JavaScript, Python, Ruby and such, and spoken language too. Are they English speakers or not? So there's something you have to care, some checklist when you're creating like content for developers. So first thing I want to say is really don't bias and be inclusive. Means I keep seeing this, people refer developers as he. Really? Of course, as a female engineer, I get offended when people keep calling him he. So yes, I make sure, it's not like I try to be, politically correct and such. It's just you can't forget about somebody who's not he. So if you're writing blog posts, tutorials, just make sure. And avoid, I say US because I'm primarily working in the US, but any regional centric cultural references. So many times this is something especially Americans forget because Hollywood movies go everywhere. We always assume the rest of the world understand our jokes. Some TV movie references, right? But not always. Sometimes even offensive, right? So I'm not saying don't use it. Of course, memes and everything's fun. But if you keep using a whole lot, and eventually you're maybe, in this case, like a non-US developers kind of fed up with this. I don't get this. I don't want to read this anymore, And support more languages is always a good idea. It's not like we have, like at the Slack, we don't have a whole lot of DevRel people, so we don't really support a whole bunch of languages, but we try. So not just JavaScript, like Python, Ruby, there's so many people out there using different languages, obviously. And another type of language, yes, it's always nice to have localized content, but it's kind of tricky, so it's not like we all have the luxury of having localized content. But still, I believe the diverse DevRel teams really inspires diverse developers out there. It's really nice to have own team with diverse members. So, I said I'm from San Francisco, but not originally, because I was actually born and raised in Japan. So, yes, I do speak Japanese. So when I go to events in Japan, yeah, I do speak Japanese. I give a talk in Japanese. And lucky enough, I have a colleague, Helen, and she speaks Mandarin. So we did some developer events together last summer in Asia, and she gave a talk in Mandarin in Taipei, and I gave a talk in Japanese in Tokyo, and that worked out quite well. But then, yes, the reality is, well, you can't always get multilingual DevRel people in a company. There are many. It's hard to hire somebody. And this is actually the biggest issue. I talked to so many people, especially when I was in Tokyo. I was talking with my friends, DevRel friends in Tokyo, say, how do you support like localized documentations? And we don't really have the best answers because there's so many reasons, So it's, of course, it's really hard to find somebody that's a technical translation. And then next one is really what we face into. We're kind of afraid to lose the brand tone of voice, So if you have ever read the Slack documentation, Slack API documentation, it has some tone of voice. It has some characteristics. So it won't translate actually. So we're kind of afraid if it's translated in a more boring way or it's just different tone of voice, you know. And the timeliness is another thing, you know, because, well, let's say you have a new feature, you launch, and the documentation's out there. But then to support the localized content, you might have to wait like another week or even month. So it's really not easy to, you know, ship the documentation all languages all together. And of course, on documentations like living docs, it's always updated or maybe deprecated. If things change so frequently, so it just can't catch up the translation. And then, yes, no budget. That can go with everything here. If you don't have enough budget, you can't really do anything. And it's most of the case, you just can't get it. And it's always hard to be. It's you know, people often talk about it, but it never gets like a top priority of what you want to do. And the priority is so low, that means less budget. So, but still, you know, I don't want to be too pessimistic about it, but just try something with low budget. Let's do something like, you know, getting help from local companies and communities when you have regional meetups and conferences. And in our case, like let's say when I went in Tokyo, well, I speak in Japanese fine, but if your company doesn't have somebody who speaks Japanese, then just get contact with the community members, like whatever local JS meetups and organizers and speakers out there who's using your product. And of course, you know, the company have some strategic partners and customers out there. So work with, you know, biz dev team to reach out those people, or sales people to reach out those people who wants to, you know, speak at meetups and conference. And actually, in that way, we did quite successfully in other nations. We always try to reach out our partners. And yes, everybody wants to speak about that, you know, what they have done with like Slack APIs and stuff. So it's been quite successful. And you can also create accessible video content. So yes, YouTube has closed captions, or you can even use the translations. It's Google, so they have a translation API, so you know, you can use Google Translate. It's not perfect, but you can do that. So closed caption helps not just, you know, hearing impaired people, but people whose, you know, primary language is not English, who have a hard time understanding by listening, but they can read. So that's quite helpful. And you can have a translations. Like I said, machine translation is not the perfect, it's not the most ideal, you know, feature, but it still helps. And of course, if you speak the language, you can always manually tweak it. And a community-driven translation, it's great. So this is example from DevOpera. So I wrote this article in English, but the great thing about it is Opera has it open sourced. So this document, this article is actually available in the GitHub and under the Creative Commons license. That means community just go there, you know, fork it, translate it, send a PR, you know, pull request, and now, yes, my English article is available in Russian, which is so awesome. Yeah, so that was my talk, but you know, I kind of added some bonus slides. This is some fun fact, well, maybe not always fun fact, but so like again, I often have a chance to go to Japan and dealing with developers out there. It's quite different, you know. So I actually never have worked in Japanese companies or even in Japan or any Japanese companies in the US or anything. So everything's quite new to me, although I do understand language and culture. So every time I go there and speak at conferences and throw an event, I find something new. So some interesting things I found at meetups and conferences is, okay, first one is not actually, like again, fun fact, it's sad fact. Conference is almost always on a weekend. At least the conferences I spoke at was held on Saturdays, Sundays. Apparently the reason is because for engineers out there, engineers in Japan, it's really hard to get, approval from their bosses to attend conferences in a weekday, like work days. And at the meetup, I was actually kind of shocking. So food. So in the US, I'm not sure about here, but at least in San Francisco, when we had a meetup, we just serve food in the beginning, like a social hours. Let's say door opened at 6 and meetup start at 7. And people usually show up early, eat and social, and that's something we encourage to do. But I try to do it the same way in Japan. I had a lot of food and no one's eating, no one's even touching it. I was like, why? They don't like pizza or what? And I asked some people. Apparently, that's really unusual. People serve food, like organizers serve food in the end of the meetup. It's normal. So there is no such thing as like social hours beforehand. But I'm like, but aren't they hungry now? It's evening meetups. They just got out from their work. They must be hungry. So I had to feed them. Otherwise, they're going to be too hungry. Because when you're hungry, your brain doesn't work, right? So I'm like, I have to feed them. So I grab the microphone, went up on stage, and people just eat. But no one's still touching the pizza. So I'm like, oh, what's wrong with you? And then I was like, okay, I have to tell you the story. And I told them, it's normal things to do in San Francisco. And one thing I knew about them is people really try to kind of sort of do in the Silicon Valley way. So if I use this Silicon Valley as a keyword, people like, oh, okay, I wanna act like Silicon Valley engineer. So, so I said, yes, in Silicon Valley, everybody eat pizza before the meetup. So please do. It worked. And everybody was tweeting about it, so I thought it was funny. And another fun fact, I don't think this is really true for everything, but the old one sign, the tune, means get the F out. Seriously. So businesses over there, could be like department store or even gambling places, play this tune when they are closing. So at the meetup I was hosting, actually the people who helped to organize the meetup start playing the tune. And yes, people start leaving. So I'm like, wow. And my American colleagues didn't know about this, and they were like, what does this mean? What does this mean? But that means, yes, stores closing and meetup's over. Everybody start leaving, that's right. So that was kind of fun fact. Of course, these are probably not always true, but that's something I've observed. And yeah, we have Atsushi here, so we can always ask him if it's true or that he knows more fun facts. And yes, anime and kawaii is definitely things there. This was actually shocking to find because I was talking to a bunch of DevRel friends in Tokyo, and they all have such cute swags. Everything has to be cute, like anime-ish. And many companies even publish, like self-published manga. Manga is like comic book. And that was amazing. They explain their API using anime characters. Seriously. And sometimes people in anime costumes. And another interesting thing was like impersonations and characters, something called the characters. So I show you some example. So this is a tweet from Kinton. So Kinton has like APIs, and this is from Kinton developers account actually. And those anime books are actually tech books. They are explaining APIs with manga. That's an awesome idea. But they're not the only company who's doing this actually. And this is the actual photo I took at the W3C developer meetup several years ago. I guess that's pretty normal for them, I find it's adorable. So, the frog and Doraemon. I guess some of you know the Doraemon. And that's on the impersonation I was talking about. So, this is so cute, Yeah, some developers created some cutesy stuff, both, yeah, obviously this is describing, browsers. So browsers can be cute and kawaii. So apparently, many times in having success over there in Japan, it's kawaii is the biggest factor. So I guess GitHub is doing really wonderful job of having all those, Octocat stickers. And apparently, well, as somebody told me, actually, this is really the factor of their success. I don't know if it's really true or not, but I believe this, And I think I should include a Tweety or Alex, in the slide next time if I give the same talk then. I didn't know about Alex. That's awesome. Gender neutral name. So yes, so this is it, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tomomi. So as we are setting up the next speaker, Kira Whitaker from Shopify, just want to reiterate that the program later, we have workshops. We have 2 workshop rooms later. One will be in Forest Room, and another one will be at Warehouse Rooms. So you can choose to either room to be in. Ready?
Product. This is advertorial. We want some money if you want to go on our blog, and they charge, we want $5,000, and it can be 1,000 words and this kind of stuff. So it didn't really work. We got a few tutorials, code based on Tuts, which performed really well for us. They got a lot of traffic, but we had a lot of resistance. It's kind of funny coming full circle 6 years later. The same blogs now come to us and ask for content. And they don't want any money for it, because I think the demand for Shopify has increased as much that they now need the content. We tried some things in print with NetMag. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with that. Is that available here? No? Blank faces.
America's website builder.
Oh, website builder, yes. There you go. We did a few, they had a sort of 20,000 person, or so they told me, they're salespeople, mailing list in terms of people who actually subscribe to it. And so we worked with them on a couple of their money issues, which focused a lot around how web designers, web developers make money, but then we obviously spun it around to our own needs around e-commerce as well. And we had a sort of special supplement that we worked with them on the previous issue to this. Couldn't actually find a screenshot, that had some code tutorials as well as people working in the Shopify ecosystem, sort of explaining how they were specializing and why that's something worth thinking about. So limited success again with that. Tutorial videos, I think they work really well. They're great. We actually took a lot of the workshops that we'd done and we chunked it up and created sort of 30 videos, really specific things, how to do X with Shopify, how to do Y with Shopify. I think someone said it earlier, but I think tutorial videos are distinctly different to docs. Docs are very much kind of, here's what the API offers or what a theme is. It doesn't actually tell you how to necessarily go about it with, I mean, some do, but traditionally more like, here's some solid examples. This is what you want to consider. They feel a bit more friendly. We had one problem. We really only had YouTube as the home for them. At the point when we produced them, we didn't have what we now call our partner blog, the web design and development blog for Shopify partners. So yes, we threw them up on YouTube and we did a few tweets and a few newsletters, but fundamentally they kind of languished there. People weren't going there at that time to find videos on Shopify theme building. They're still there. They still work. They look a little bit dated now, but all intents and purposes, the Liquid tutorials are pretty current. When we did get the blog, it was deemed that because the admin UI had changed enough that they wouldn't be relevant, and so they kind of never really got the love I think they deserved, and we've never really done any more. We also made the big mistake of leaving comments on, and as we all know, people are very, very kind in YouTube comments. The best one was something along the lines of, I wish Shopify would stop employing people with fake English accents to narrate their videos. It was me narrating them. This is actually my accent. And there were some other ones about I should read bedtime stories and I should shut the whatever up because my voice is really annoying. So you just can't win. We sponsored a lot of events. I had a lot of friends who ran and still do run events in the sort of web design conference scene. And so leveraged a lot of those relationships, and we tried to see whether these would be a good sort of hunting ground for people who we thought would be the good demographic to be a Shopify partner. It allowed us to put ourselves in front of those kind of people, talk to them about the platform, show them code examples, that kind of thing. And basically, we just wanted to get a list of people to follow up with so we could tell them more after the event. So our initial attempts were pretty basic. The irony of my two colleagues there with the three white guys on the thing is not gone unnoticed. We've definitely got better at being more representative in our advertising now. But we would pitch up with these very basic banners, because no one had time to create them, at various events. This one is in the Smashing Conf, I think, a few years ago in New York. But over time, we upped our game, and we worked with some designer, a friend of mine called Mike Coos, and we came up with these kind of more branded, crazy ideas, slogan-based. This one, actually, I really like this one because everything tied in, but people would literally just come up and go, what is this? What? And so it's a conversation starter. Like, I'll say, look, it's Shopify, it says so at the top. And, there's like, little dollar sign somewhere in there. But it was actually a good thing. It was a little bit different. A pain to put together those three things, lining them up. I was very bad at that. But actually, it was a good talking point, and we had those for a couple of years. We also started to do lunch and learn sessions at conferences. This worked really well because it's kind of permission-based marketing. If someone opts in to come to your free lunch, I think you've got a right to really sort of talk to them about exactly what you want to talk to them about. You don't have to dress it up in any way. Beer and pretzels in Berlin went down a treat. People came, but then they left after the beer and pretzels. And our sort of 40-minute talk was probably only 50% attended. But we had some good conversations after that. People would come up, and as the product got more popular in Europe as well, people would come up with specific questions. And you actually found out that they were actually doing a lot of work with us, and we just hadn't really realized it. So they were good in a lot of ways, and it also gave an excuse for people to come and have a drink, have a chat, learn a bit more about Shopify. This particular one wasn't actually about the actual product. This was a talk by one of our UX researchers about how they went about thinking around product changes and the design and the UI. So that actually worked really well because it got people thinking about Shopify's, they're thinking about this problem in a certain way. So it kind of leveled up the knowledge of what Shopify was doing. Free stores for influencers. This was something we tried and really, really didn't work. I don't know if any of you guys in here have ever sort of tried to give away your product to people you thought would use it in a really fun way. I had a hit list of people well known in the industry. I thought, yeah, it'd be great. We'll give them a store. It'll be easy. They can set up in 5 minutes. They can sell something. They had no time to set it up themselves, so you end up doing it yourself. They really had nothing to sell. And so that was a problem. And yeah, they just, they wouldn't talk about it. So tried a few of those, and all of them failed. That's to say, it's nice to have the ability to have a few, giveaways up your sleeve. And I've helped more creative friends who aren't well known in the industry get up and running on a few stores. And that's been really interesting to work with them on that, because when you're not at the coalface of actually selling on the platform every day, you learn more about your product by doing it with someone like that. So it has benefits as well. I guess it goes back to dog fooding, whoever mentioned that earlier. Webinars, this was something we tried. We had a bunch of people do webinars with us, and we pitched these out as not just really Shopify ones, but also like UX, CSS, performance. And the idea here was if we can convene people in the industry around a theme, we'll get them to come to our webinar, and then we can just do a very subtle pitch about Shopify and the platform and the partner program. It worked really well in getting people who wanted to learn about CSS from Harry Roberts to come to our site, but then they had no interest, really, in learning more about the partner program. So, again, we tried this for a long time, and some of them were more specific. A couple on the end here were more focused on the business side of running e-commerce agencies. They worked particularly well, and I'll talk more about how we sort of built on that shortly. But yeah, as a sort of an endeavor to get more partners, it kind of didn't work. Very well attended. Some of these had 300 or 400 people attending, but with hindsight, you realize it's because they wanted to learn about specific technology. And then swag. I guess DevRel really is just about swag, isn't it? We've talked a lot of who's got the best stickers. Certainly not me. I have no little character to talk about. I'm sorry. We thought about putting face and legs on the bag, but brand said no. So, anyways, but what we did we did try these campaigns around design, and one of them was design is at the heart of everything we do. We wanted to push the fact that Shopify cared about design. It was a design-led company. It was really sort of thinking about that. And so we had this particular graphic done, again, by my friend and old colleague Mike, and we put it on T-shirts, because everybody loves a T-shirt, right? And people actually wore them, which was kind of cool. Although Graham on the end there doesn't look too happy that I made him take a photo. We gave away thousands of these, and people still pitch up to the events that we run with them, and it's kind of like, that's a 6-year-old T-shirt. Seriously? You don't want a new one? But one trick, if you have a 2-day conference that you're sponsoring and you have a really cool T-shirt, the next day, like 30% of people, because clearly they packed in a hurry, come in one of your T-shirts. So, and then it starts a conversation, and then everyone wants one, you've run out, but they come up to the stand and you can have a chat. So, guerrilla tactics. But T-shirts, the bane of my life. I literally spent hours packing boxes and trying to ship them. Shipping is really hard. I don't know why putting a box from the UK to Germany would be so problematic, or any part of the world. I'm not picking on Germany. So I actually paid a friend of mine, Chris, to store them all in his shed in the garden. He became my chief shipper and earned a few quid. We've kind of scaled it up a lot more now, but that was fun times. We played around with coasters. I don't know why coasters have been a theme for us over the years. This was a play on liquid, a liquid coaster for your drink. We even had some fun code analogy around the side. These are fun. Someone mentioned earlier people tweet pictures and stuff like that. Often people would Instagram photos of their morning coffee on the mat. Again, very hard to work out if any of this stuff actually results in any more people joining your program or doing more with you, but little mementos that will kind of, register a thought later on when they're thinking about e-commerce, maybe. Mugs became a thing too. We had these tin mugs. Lesson with tin mugs, great for pens and pencils, not great for hot liquids. They get very, very hot, at least for me. But again, you can see that we had these kind of sign-up forms. It was very none in your face. We never asked at this point for any details to give away any of the swag items. It was much more like, yeah, sure, if you'd like one, take one, but if you'd like us to follow up with you, we'll happily do so. Just leave your name and email. We tried using things like iPads, very, very difficult. Pen and paper seems to work so much better. Used to have a lot of arguments about this when people who'd never worked on a stand at a conference. I was like, go ahead and try it. And then they come back and go, okay, you were right. Pen and paper. And then they'd have to spend an hour or two inputting all the names into a spreadsheet. But the one thing with swag is you're just never going to beat MailChimp. I mean, look, my kids never wear any of the swag I've created, but quite happily have a photo taken in 2 hand-knitted chimp hats. But there you go. So, yeah, DevRel basically is the challenge of coming up with the best swag, I think. That's it. Here endeth the session. Sorry, there is more. So we tried a lot of these tactics. How can we get more people interested in Shopify? How can we make people aware of Shopify? How can we maybe give them the tools to learn about the platform, learn about themes, learn about what it does and what it can offer you? And the initial results were good. More people were signing up to the partner program, to the point of sort of 2 or 3 years later, we were getting 1,000 people a week signing up for the program, but we weren't necessarily seeing them actually do much with us in terms of bringing on merchants, which is where the money is, right? And I think a lot of that growth can also be attributed, as I said earlier, to the growth of Shopify in terms of its reach into the market. It was becoming more well-known, the company was growing, the number of people using it was growing, and so the demand for people who had the skills to build themes and build apps against the platform was increasing. So I think the awareness had helped, Shopify was growing, the demand for designers and developers was growing, and so it's kind of like that. But the challenge really became, how do we actually get these people who are signing up to do more with the platform, to actually start using it in a meaningful way, to bring on more clients. And so instead of a client coming to them and saying, do you do Shopify? It's like, we do Shopify, you should use Shopify. And what we realized was that while we're doing a great job, and I hate to use marketing terminology, but at the top of the funnel, we were getting a lot of people coming, being aware, having initial interest, but they weren't doing much further down. So we needed to work out why that was. And I think what we realized to a point was that a lot of these people who had the desire to use Shopify as a solution for their clients and become e-commerce specialists, the struggle wasn't technical. It wasn't that they needed us to teach them all the ins and outs of the platform. It was more they needed to know, how do I convince a client that they should use a hosted platform that they have to pay you for in addition to paying me? How do I pitch that? What are the pitfalls? There were some functionality gaps. How do I convince the client that they should use your product over another product? What are the ways around that? And so what we started to think was that maybe it's not about the technical so much, it's more about the kind of the business, the economics of it, the sort of functioning of agencies and freelancers. And so it was kind of a light bulb moment when we actually realized that if we sort of still carried on with some of the educational stuff, but really doubled down on sharing how successful partners were being and how they were doing it in different markets, maybe that would increase the numbers actually doing stuff with the platform. But the thing about community is that you can't control it. You can't even shepherd it even. It has a life of its own. And what we actually found was much of this work that we thought we needed to do was actually being done out there. We had like inklings of it, but actually we dug deeper. We realized there was an actual awful lot going on. So we decided to piggyback onto a lot of this. And we found out that there were people who were running Facebook groups. There were Shopify-focused podcasts. What else did we have? We had Slack groups where partners were convening and sharing their war stories about how they convinced people to use the platform, the problems they had, how they were solving them. People were creating content that you could buy, like this course, e-commerce bootcamp, which looked at kind of the merchant's perspective. How are people out there using Shopify? So as a designer or developer, you could consume this and have a better understanding of what your needs are, what you need to offer. So we decided that we would help with their struggle, that being the business side of it. And that's when we really started to double down on this kind of more business-focused education. But the problem was, none of us at Shopify were business experts. Maybe we'd been a web designer back in the day and had a few clients, but none of us had actually gone on this journey that we were saying these people should go on to be profitable. So we looked to our partner ecosystem. Who were these people that were doing great stuff? Who were the ones that were succeeding financially? Who were the ones that were satisfying their clients and actually performing really well? And we asked them to help us. And so one of the first projects that we did, and it's really interesting to see the books from Stripe over there, was create what became a trilogy called Grow. And this was all around the kind of the business of actually being, a Shopify expert, someone who's succeeding at attracting clients, pitching well, and it addressed all those questions that we felt were lumps in the road that people needed to get over to succeed. And so over a couple of years, we produced these 3 volumes. They were all in print as well as online, and every every book had all the chapters written by our partners. So again, it wasn't us saying that we were the experts. We were saying, these people are doing it, you should listen to them. So we enabled them to tell their stories. We enabled them to share their path to success. And they're all willing to do it. So you might ask, why would someone want to give away their secret to success? But you rationalize it out, and everyone's on a different journey. They're going to be at different points of that path, and no two journey is the same. It's going to give you ideas. It's going to give you validation that what you're doing is correct. It's going to make you think, damn, that's a wrong turn. I need to rethink that. Or it's going to open your eyes up to something entirely different, a new way of thinking. So that's what these books did. And we literally gave away probably 2,000 or 3,000 of each volume at conferences in swag bags as downloadable PDFs. And we still get people coming up to us now at events saying, when's volume 4? I don't know. The team responsible for that, I think, are focusing on different things at the moment. But these proved really, really valuable to people. And then we did some other things. We helped partners start their own local meetups. There are literally hundreds of these Shopify meetups happening around the globe. This is from the Singapore one on the 4th of July. We help fund these. We give a stipend for refreshments and food. And this is a way that people who have a common interest in Shopify, whether it be from the merchant side or the partner side, can come together, learn and share. And it often is a great place where partners meet potential merchants, they get work, they're seen as the expert because they're talking. So it kind of elevates the partner up the food chain. I personally see meetups as kind of the bedrock of the community initiatives that we do, and I'd like to see these scaled up massively in 2019 with more financial support, better branding, more like feedback. I think meetups can be a great product feedback loop as well. And I also think it's a real, if you can support these, it's a real way to really strengthen those ties and sort of leverage their knowledge in a friendly way to sort of up their standing, but also that of Shopify as well. So it's a double win, really. We also carried out a lot of ad hoc informal events that we called an afternoon/evening, depending on the time of day, with Shopify. And what we do with these is we'd invite partners or people in the industry to come talk for sort of 20 minutes. We'd supply the food at the beginning, always at the beginning. And then you'd get people come along, faces that you knew, new people, and then sort of people, we hosted them in places like WeWork, and you get people from those spaces come in. So again, they were just very easy to action, very easy to get sort of 50, 60 people in a room. And often they prove very, very successful in getting new people interested. We help partners speak at third-party conferences. Now, this was something that felt a little weird at first, in the sense that a lot of speaking ops come with sponsorship. And I didn't really want to be the guy who got up there and sort of did the Shopify talk. It felt a little bit disingenuous. So we gave these opportunities to our partners. Like, well, we're doing that in print, we're doing it online, let's do it in person at conferences. Let's offer these speaking ops to people who we've been working with on these things. And this is a guy called Alex O'Byrne, who's from a London and New York-based agency called We Make Websites. They regret the name, apparently, but it does what it says on the tin. They specialize in Shopify, and he shared his learnings from their content strategy, how they use content, particularly their blog, to attract new customers. We did this with a few other events, and it worked really well, and they've now been independently invited back to talk on these matters. There is a risk, I think, when you do this, that you might think they're going to put, you have to trust them, that they're going to put your message or the message of Shopify in a way that is positive. But it always comes through that way. I've never stipulated that they needed to mention Shopify or anything like that. It just kind of came through in the subject matter. So that worked really well. We put partners on stage at Unite. Unite has happened 3 times now. It's the Shopify sort of annual developer conference, partner conference. Happened in San Francisco for 2 years. The second one was actually really interesting because on day 2, there was a sort of statewide power cut. And so all of the program that we had got cancelled, and we had basically 1,000 people in the Fort Mason Center, kind of out the front, if anyone knows it, getting sunburn and just chatting. And most people remember that more than the actual content of the conference. So there's an idea for the next conference. It was quite funny the next morning in Starbucks. I was getting a coffee, and there was a guy in front of me who just had a red neck bar from this like white line around the back. I was like, I'm not Columbo, but I know exactly where you were yesterday. So, but yeah, we put Shopify Unite is an opportunity for Shopify to talk to its ecosystem. It's a way we can tell them what products are coming, what things are happening. It's like 90% that, but then 10% is the partners sort of sharing their stories. Again, it's inspirational. It's also good, actionable advice through the panels. And then we started to develop content specifically around the subject matter that we've been talking around in Grow, we've been talking about in blog articles, and some of the partners have been talking about at conferences. And the initial test of this was called A Day with Shopify. We built on the brand name of an evening and afternoon with, that happened in Bristol in the UK in December 2016. And we sort of saw this as Unite flipped on its head. It was like 90% partners talking back to themselves and sharing, and 10% of Shopify with one talk, just sort of sharing some sort of behind-the-scenes sneak peeks of what was going on. That grew last year to a 5-city tour. We went to Birmingham in the UK, Melbourne, Australia, Bangalore in India, New York and Vancouver. And the idea there is not everyone can travel to San Francisco or Toronto as it was this year. It's prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. There's often visa issues. We found people can't travel. They're not allowed to. They can't make it. So we took the show to them. And we used local partners in those regions because each region has different challenges for people working in that space. And so different partners have different stories, different advice, different learnings. And this year, we rebranded it because it went up to 2 days, so the naming convention just failed. And we called it Pursuit, and the idea is it's turning ideas into action. This year, it's in London, UK, Berlin, Melbourne, Bangalore, and New York again. And the hope is that this will grow out over the next year or two to include more cities. That's the London one. We had about 200 people at that. That was really fun. And again, as well as the partners doing the presentations, we kind of convene them together as well for panels and Q&A, which is probably the best bit of the day. They're not vetted, the questions. It's quite challenging. It's good to see how the management respond to some of those questions. And then the last thing we did was to celebrate our partners with an annual Commerce Awards. This was various categories around themes, around apps, around UI. And it's judged by a panel of their peers, but also people from Shopify and people from the web design and development industry as well. And that's proved really popular. A lot of people have said that the additional recognition of winning one of these has really helped sort of put them above some of the competition in the market when it comes to pitching for jobs. A lot of people who are very successful in our space are 2, 3, 4-person companies, and they're going up against big agencies. So things like this have proved really, really sort of an endorsement that they have the skills to actually deliver the work. So these relationships are what I call friendly leverage. There's something in it for either of us. It's done in a very friendly way. There's benefits on both sides. For us, it helped us scale our output of content. It helped us share partner stories in a genuine way that benefited us as a company and grew our partner ecosystem. As I say, I can get up there in the hoodie all day, but I'm kind of paid to tell you how good it is. These guys aren't. They're genuinely telling their story, warts and all. And we often encourage them, say, look, don't leave the bad bits out. Say how it goes. You know, everyone has positive and negatives, but generally it came over in a very positive way for us. Partners are also a great feedback loop, as I said earlier. Having people who are closely aligned to you, who are using your product on a daily basis, who are actually using it for clients, telling you what you need, but they're doing it in a way that's beneficial to you and it's not in an aggressive way is really, really positive. And they kind of, by binding these ties together, they become your biggest advocates. They end up doing the work for you. And you'll often meet people around the world and they say, oh yeah, I spoke to so-and-so, or I watched so-and-so's talk, and it's like, that made me have a look at X on your site, and then I signed up. And so it really does work. What's in it for the partners? Authority. They kind of increase their standing within the ecosystem. They have that affiliation with us in terms of knowing that they can speak to us candidly about what they need, what problems they're facing. That helps us improve all aspects of what we offer them. Other opportunities open up, like the speaking gigs, or many of these people that we've helped now are independently getting offered book deals and regular contributions to blogs, that kind of thing. And we also pay them for their contributions as well. We don't ask for this for free. We pay them going rate for their time and input as we would with anybody else. But I wanted to sort of finish off just with sort of some of the things that, hindsight being the great healer, what I would do differently if I was to start all this over again. It's been really encouraging to see how advanced a lot of the people's kind of, especially the GitHub classroom stuff, how, well-rounded it is. We started from a much different base, I think. We didn't have a dedicated team. It wasn't necessarily called DevRel. It was kind of marketing, but it's design. So all these different things. And it's been fascinating. The team of 2, when I started, is now a team of 20 called Partner Marketing. We have full-time blog editors, writers, content creators, dedicated email marketing team, that kind of stuff. So many of the scrappy experiments kind of have evolved. Many have gone by the wayside, but some have evolved into bigger projects that still continue to work well for us today. But if I was to do it all again, what would I do differently? Well, the first thing I'd do is I'd put education, both on the business side and the technical side, really as the bedrock. We had great success in building awareness, but we had a website that didn't really tell people much about what we needed to do. To become a successful partner, we had some tutorials on YouTube. We didn't have a blog. Really get those foundation levels really secure. No one's going to be ungrateful for a tutorial or good documentation. But give them a home. Give them a home that they can find, and identify the struggle that the partners are experiencing or your community is experiencing, and help them solve it through those documentation. Don't forget the mid-funnel. Again, forgive me for talking about funnels again. But as I said, awareness is great, but have something to send those people to. Give them a reason to want more information. Give them a reason to give you your email, whether it be a drip campaign of like tutorials, a really good site that tells you these are the first 3 steps you need to do now. Put things in your dashboard. If you sign up to a product, how many of us have landed in a dashboard and be like, okay, great, now what? Make it very easy for them to take the next steps to success. And then finally, kind of identify and support your biggest advocates as soon as you can. Make them feel special, make them feel supported, give them the nurture that they need, care for them, invest in them, as I believe that's one of the best ways to kind of scale your efforts in community building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerr. I have a question for you. How do you measure swag ROI? I want to know.
Oh, you don't.
There must be a funnel, right?
How many people come back on day 2 wearing a T-shirt? No, I don't know. I've been asked that question many, many times. Don't really have a very definitive answer. I think you go with the basics, right? How many things do you give out? Yeah, it's, I mean, it doesn't cost a lot. Looks nice.
So we have lunch break now. But before that, we'd like to take a group photo. So if everyone can just gather on the stage here, that'd be great. Thank you.
Oh, sure, yeah.